Today is a big day for me because I'm at home, surrounded by walls full of memories. Jack is here too, looking so proud and happy. He's exploring the rooms with excitement, and I can't help but feel his energy rubbing off on me. We're in the main part of my family's house, the place where my dad's dreams came true. My dad worked really hard to make this place amazing, and now it's worth a whopping $100 million. It's like his legacy, something he left behind for me when he passed away. Now, without my dad by my side, my husband wants a piece of our family's legacy. He insists that what used to be mine alone should now belong to both of us. But I know better. I have proof. Papers with my name, Sarah, as the rightful owner. At 42, I work in the digital world, thanks to my job at an online bank. This career wasn't just a whim, it was shaped by the values my parents taught me about money management. They showed me how important it is to be responsible with finances, lessons I still carry with me today. Growing up with money, my parents taught me to respect it and not take it for granted. Despite our wealth, they made sure I didn't grow up spoiled. My allowance was just like everyone else's, and we didn't eat fancy meals all the time. I went to a regular public school, not some fancy private one. But somehow, rumors about us being super rich spread anyway. People thought my life was all about luxury and fun because of our big house and money. Sarah, with your huge house and all your money, life must be easy, right? You must have all the cool gadgets and games. Can we come over and play? People often asked me these questions, thinking I had everything. But the truth was, my life wasn't as extravagant as they thought. I didn't have the newest toys or gaming consoles, but people still assumed I did. Sometimes it felt like everyone just wanted to be my friend because of my family's money. Sarah, you're rich, right? Can you lend me some money? People asking for money always made me uneasy. It felt like I didn't understand the values my parents taught me. Then, I got into a tough spot when I accidentally broke Maria's gaming console. I didn't have any money at that moment, which made things even worse. Around the same time, Julie and I became classmates. She asked if I had told my parents about the accident, but I was too scared of disappointing them to say anything. I can't tell them. They might get mad. That's why I'm asking you, Sarah, she confessed. Saying no felt awful, especially since I didn't want things to be awkward at school. But my parents were clear about not lending money, so I had to apologize to Julie and explain that I couldn't help. After I couldn't help Julie, she ended up crying. And soon rumors started flying around. People accused me of not helping a friend in need, even though my family was well off. I tried to explain that I didn't have any money to spare, but it didn't seem to matter. Then, Maria said something that really hurt. She suggested that I cared more about money than friendship. Things got worse when Maria and Julie started spreading lies, saying I owed them money and refused to pay for the broken console. The school found out the truth eventually and scolded Maria and Julie. But instead of stopping, the rumors got worse and even reached my parents. My dad decided to deal with it and organized a meeting with their families. Even though they said sorry, I decided to stay away from Maria and Julie after that. I still had to deal with their looks and whispers, but at least there were no more direct confrontations. During dinner that night, my dad shared advice that stuck with me for years. He said it's important to stand by your decisions, especially when it comes to money. Sarah, it's okay to say no, he said with a smile. You don't have to tell anyone about your finances. If someone keeps asking, just say you'll have to check with your parents, even if you know you can't lend money. This lesson about handling money matters gracefully and firmly became really important to me. As I grew up, I became more careful about who I let into my life, focusing on friendships based on character, not money. After university, I made sure to keep my work and personal life separate, avoiding any financial complications. This whole experience taught me the importance of setting boundaries in both friendships and finances, and it's shaped who I am today. When I was 35, I met Jack through a friend, and despite him being a bit younger, his genuine personality quickly won me over. We started casually dating, and before long, it turned into something serious. 2 years later, we had a beautiful wedding, which made my parents really happy. After we'd been married for about a month, my dad suggested that Jack come over to our house. I trusted Jack, but I was worried that he might accidentally reveal some private family stuff because he loves to talk. Still, after a month of marriage, I felt ready to let him in on everything about my family. So, I invited him to visit my parents' house. Jack was amazed when he saw my family's house. His surprise was obvious, showing that he hadn't realized how well off my family was. Even though the visit went well, Jack couldn't stop asking about our money on the way home. I didn't know much about our finances myself, so his questions made me feel uneasy. A few months after we got married, my mom called to tell me that my dad was in the hospital. It was a shock, especially since I didn't know he was having health problems. Thinking back to our last visit, I remembered how he didn't seem well, and now I felt really worried and guilty. When I went to the hospital with my mom that Saturday, my dad tried to stay cheerful, but we could tell he was feeling down. He apologized for what he saw as a burden to us, showing his gentle nature. Then the doctors told us he had advanced pancreatic cancer, and it had spread too much for surgery. It was like a punch to the gut. We couldn't believe someone as health-conscious as my dad could get so sick. After the diagnosis, my dad stayed strong. He just wanted us to be happy, which made us all tear up. I wanted to spend every moment with him, but hospital rules meant only close family could visit. He wished for our friends to be around to make happy memories at home, which reminded us of the life he wanted for us. So I promised to keep our home full of joy, even after he was gone. Keeping that promise became really important to me. I decided to renovate our family home, something to focus on during such a tough time. Jack, always caring, worried about how much I was doing for my dad, not realizing the other stuff I was dealing with, like our family's estate issues that I hadn't told him about. When Jack asked about my dad's health, I finally opened up to him about everything we were going through. It was a relief to have the support while juggling work, hospital visits, and all the emotions. However, things got tense when Jack started asking about my dad's money and the family estate. He even suggested getting legal advice, just in case something happened to my mom too. It brought up painful memories for me. My dad had a lawyer he trusted, but Jack's insistence on being cautious with money started causing problems between us. A few months later, my dad passed away after bravely battling his illness. Then, the discussions about inheritance started within the family. I ended up getting a big house worth $5.5 million. But Jack's growing interest in the inheritance, despite me trying to keep him out of it, made things even harder. He was excited about moving into the mansion and kept asking about financial stuff, which caught me off guard. I later found out he'd been talking to my cousin at the funeral, who mentioned how the house would be a waste if it stayed empty. That just made things more complicated. Despite my attempts to explain to Jack that the inheritance wasn't something we shared, he didn't seem to listen. Our relationship started getting more hostile because of it. Even though he was there at my dad's funeral, Jack didn't help out with the memorial services or the legal stuff that followed. As things started to settle down and life went on, Jack dropped a bombshell. He said he changed the ownership of my family home to his name, and he had legal papers to prove it. I was shocked and hurt. Not only did he break my trust, but it also showed a huge lack of respect for our relationship and the boundaries we had. Dealing with inheritance issues brought up bigger problems in our marriage. We had to rethink what we valued, how much we trusted each other, and where our relationship was headed. When Jack told me he changed the ownership of our family home without telling me, I was shocked and hurt. He said he was tired of our marriage and suggested we live together as roommates in the house, with him not giving me much financial support. He even threatened divorce if I didn't agree, which was a lot to take in on top of everything else. I begged him to think about what he was doing and why he made such a big decision without talking to me. He said he'd talked to a lawyer about changing the ownership without my permission. Things got so bad that divorce seemed like the only way out. I was heartbroken and lost, feeling like I had to distance myself from the home and life I'd shared with Jack. I couldn't understand why he'd do something like this, and it felt like money had changed him for the worse. The next day, Jack demanded the house keys, saying the house was his now. This just made things worse. He tried to get into the house, but security stopped him. I showed them the real ownership papers, proving the house was mine because of my dad. Seeing the proof, Jack was shocked. He trusted a guy named Jerry to help him with legal stuff, and Jerry had lied to him. Jack had even given Jerry $360,000 to change the ownership, but it turned out to be a scam. Jack was really upset. He kept trying to call Jerry, but Jerry wouldn't answer. Jack was mad at him for tricking him and taking his money. Then he turned his anger on me, saying I spent too much money on things he thought were unnecessary. He even questioned if I understood how inheritance stuff worked. Even though Jack tried to fix things and suggested we give our marriage another chance, the trust between us was too broken. I asked the security guard to help him leave, closing a painful chapter of my life. In the months that followed, I had time to think about everything that happened. It made me realize how important trust and honesty are in a relationship. What happened with Jack, all the lies and betrayal, taught me to be careful not to let money cloud my judgment. During my dad's first memorial service at our family temple, Jack showed up unexpectedly. Since our divorce, things hadn't been going well for him. He didn't have a job, he had money problems, and it seemed like the people he trusted had let him down. He looked really sad and lost, standing there in contrast to the solemn occasion. As he tearfully tried to apologize, his actions unintentionally disrupted the memorial, causing a commotion among my relatives. Despite his emotional distress, I had to ask him to leave, and security had to step in to make sure it happened. It was a difficult moment, especially during such a solemn occasion, leaving me with mixed emotions, but also a strong desire to move forward and leave our past behind. I decided it was time to leave my parents' home, something I'd been planning for a while. I found a new place to live, cutting ties with Jack for good. Meanwhile, Jack kept coming to the family property, which we had turned into a rental villa. My mom and I ran the villa together, turning it into a happy place for many people to visit and enjoy. On his side, Jack seemed to be trying to make positive changes. He got a new job and was really focused on starting over. Turning our family home into a rental villa not only honored my dad's vision, but also created a welcoming place for guests from all walks of life. The villa, known for its stunning views and beautiful garden, became really popular. We hosted all sorts of events there, from small weddings to big family parties. Working on it with my mom brought us even closer and made us really happy. As the villa became more successful, we decided to add more stuff to make it even better. We put in a swimming pool, a cozy outdoor lounge, and a fun area for kids to play. We were really committed to making sure our guests had an amazing time, and it paid off. The villa became a top spot for people looking for a peaceful getaway and unforgettable experiences. This whole project wasn't just about making money. It was about making my dad's dream come true and creating special memories for our guests. Taking care of the villa's garden filled me with a deep sense of happiness. Seeing our family home turned into a place where people could come together, have fun, and make lasting memories made me really proud. I could almost imagine my father looking down with pride at what we had accomplished, bringing his dream to life. This venture not only fulfilled his vision, but also gave us financial stability and a sense of freedom. Along the way, I learned important lessons about trust, money, and the strength needed to forge my own path, separate from the challenges of the past. In this journey of self-discovery, I discovered that facing difficulties can actually make you stronger and more determined. I heard news about Jack from friends, and it seemed like he was turning his life around, finding a meaningful job and learning from his mistakes. Seeing his progress gave me a sense of peace, knowing that both of us were moving forward and growing. My father's dream became a driving force for growth, not just for me and my mom, but for everyone who visited the rental villa. It became a place of joy and celebration, a sanctuary where people could create lasting memories. The success of the villa is a testament to my father's vision, reminding us of the values of resilience and hard work. Through this venture, we've created more than just a place to stay. It's a source of happiness, a place for making memories, and proof that dreaming big and putting in the effort can lead to incredible things.
My name is Erica, and I never thought I'd be caught up in a family drama that would change my life forever. At 29, I was living a pretty ordinary life in the city. For the past 5 years, I'd been working as a secretary at Global Tech, a big corporation downtown. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills for my small rented apartment. Weekends were my escape. I'd throw myself into dance classes, losing myself in the rhythm and forgetting about the pile of paperwork waiting for me on Monday. It wasn't much, but it was my life, and I was content. Family, though? That was complicated. I had a younger sister, Emily, who'd always been the golden child. From the day she was born, our mother doted on her like she was made of spun sugar. Dad, well, he just fell in line with whatever Mom wanted. It was always Emily this and Emily that. I tried not to be bitter, but it was hard not to feel like a shadow in my own family. As years went by, the distance between us grew. Phone calls became less frequent, visits even more so. I'd see pictures on social media of family gatherings I wasn't invited to, Emily always front and center, beaming with our parents. It stung, but I told myself I was better off focusing on my own life. That's why I nearly dropped my phone when Mom's number flashed on my screen one Tuesday evening. I hesitated before answering, bracing myself for whatever drama might be on the other end. "Erica, it's your mother," her voice crackled through the speaker. "Hi, Mom," I replied, trying to keep my tone neutral. "Is everything okay?" "Your father wants to see you," she said, cutting straight to the chase. "Can you come to the house this weekend?" "Saturday at 2 p.m. Don't be late." And with that, she hung up. I stared at my phone, a mix of emotions swirling inside me. What could be so important that Dad wanted to see me after all this time? Part of me wanted to ignore the invitation, to protect myself from inevitable disappointment. But curiosity won out. I'd go, if only to find out what was going on. As I stood outside my parents' expensive home that Saturday, I took a deep breath. The house looked the same as always, a monument to my parents' success and a reminder of the life I'd never quite fit into. I rang the doorbell, half expecting no one to answer, half hoping no one would. The door swung open, and there stood my mother, her face a mask of polite indifference. "You're here," she said, stepping aside to let me in. "Everyone's in the living room." Seated in the plush living room were my father, looking pale and drawn, my sister Emily, and her husband, James. The atmosphere was tense, thick with unspoken words and hidden agendas. I perched on the edge of an armchair, feeling like an outsider in my own family home. Up close, I could see how ill Dad looked. His skin was pale, almost translucent, and his eyes seemed sunken. A chill ran down my spine as I realized this wasn't just a casual family gathering. "I've got something to tell you all," Dad continued, his gaze sweeping across the room. I'm terminally ill. The doctors say I don't have much time left." The words hit me like a physical blow. I gasped, tears springing to my eyes. Despite our strained relationship, I loved my father. The thought of losing him was unbearable. "Daddy," I choked out, reaching for his hand. He squeezed mine weakly, a sad smile on his face. Emily let out a dramatic sob, burying her face in her husband's shoulder. Mom sat stone-faced, her lips pressed into a thin line. I wondered how long they'd known, how long they'd kept this from me. "There's more," Dad said, his voice growing stronger. "I've made some decisions about my will." The room fell silent. Even Emily's sobs quieted as everyone leaned in, listening intently. "Mary," Dad said, looking at Mom, "you'll get the apartment in the city." Mom nodded curtly, as if this was expected. "Emily, the house will be yours." My sister's eyes lit up, a smile breaking through her tears. Then Dad turned to me, and I saw a determination in his eyes I'd never seen before. "Erica, I've decided to leave you my savings. All of it. $800,000. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. $800,000? It was more money than I'd ever dreamed of having. But more than that, it felt like acknowledgement, a way of making up for years of being overlooked. The silence that followed was deafening. Then, all hell broke loose. Emily jumped to her feet, her face contorted with rage. "Dad, that's not fair. Eric is barely even part of this family anymore." "She doesn't deserve it," Mom hissed, glaring at me as if I'd somehow orchestrated this. "John, you need to exclude her from the will. Now." I sat there, stunned, as my mother and sister railed against me. And then Dad slammed his fist on the coffee table, the sound echoing through the room. "Enough," he roared, his face flushed with anger. "This is my decision, and I won't change it." Turning to Mom, his eyes blazing, he continued, "I've been under your influence for far too long, Mary. I've neglected Erica because of you, and it ends now." The room fell silent once more. I stared at my father, seeing him in a new light. For the first time in my life, he was standing up for me. Dad turned to me then, his anger melting into sorrow. "Erica, can you ever forgive me? I've been a terrible father to you." Tears streaming down my face, I moved to him, wrapping my arms around his frail frame. "I forgive you, Dad," I whispered. "I love you." We held each other for a long moment, years of hurt and misunderstanding flowing away. When we finally separated, Dad looked exhausted. "I need to rest now," he said, slowly getting to his feet. "Erica, thank you for coming." As Dad left the room, the atmosphere shifted palpably. Mom stepped forward, her face a mask of barely contained fury. "Listen here, Erica. You need to do the right thing and give up your share of the inheritance." "No," I said, my voice stronger than I felt. "I won't give it up. Dad wants me to have it, and I'm respecting his wishes." Emily's face contorted with rage. She stepped closer, her finger jabbing at my chest. "You'll regret this, Erica. Mark my words." Over the next 2 weeks, my phone buzzed constantly with messages from Mom and Emily. Each one demanded I give up the inheritance, their tone growing increasingly hostile and threatening. I ignored them all, focusing on work and my dance classes, trying to find some semblance of normalcy. Then, on a gray Tuesday morning, I got the call I'd been dreading. Dad had passed away in his sleep. The funeral was a blur of black clothes and somber faces. Mom and Emily put on a show of grief, wailing dramatically and clutching each other. I noticed Emily wearing an obscenely expensive necklace and bracelet set, the diamonds catching the light as she dabbed at her dry eyes. After the service, we gathered at the house. I watched in disgust as Emily made a show of removing her jewelry, tucking it into her purse with exaggerated care. As the last of the guests trickled out, I gathered my things, eager to escape. That's when all hell broke loose. "My jewelry!" Emily shrieked, her hands flying to her face in mock horror. "It's gone. Someone's stolen it." Mom's eyes locked onto me, her gaze accusing. Well. Isn't it convenient that the only person who's been here all day is the one who stands to gain so much? I felt the blood drain from my face as I realized what was happening. They were setting me up. "You can't be serious," I sputtered. "I didn't take anything." Emily's husband stepped forward, his voice oozing false concern. "Then you won't mind showing us what's in your purse, right, Erica?" I clutched my bag tighter, my mind racing. I knew I was innocent, but something told me that wouldn't matter if I opened my purse. "No," I said firmly. "I don't have to prove anything to you." Emily's husband pulled out his phone. "Then you leave me no choice. I'm calling the police." As he dialed, I saw a triumphant smirk flash across Emily's face. In that moment, I realized just how far they were willing to go to get what they wanted. I stood frozen, my heart pounding, as 2 officers entered the house. Emily immediately launched into a tearful account of her stolen jewelry, painting herself as the grieving daughter, victimized on the day of her father's funeral. "Officers," Emily's husband said, his voice dripping with false concern, "we have reason to believe Erica may have taken the jewelry. She's refusing to show us the contents of her purse." The older of the 2 officers turned to me, his face impassive. "Ma'am, would you mind opening your purse for us?" I felt trapped, knowing that whatever happened next would not end well for me. With shaking hands, I opened my purse. The officer looked inside, and his expression hardened. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to come with us," he said, reaching into my purse and pulling out Emily's necklace and bracelet. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. "This isn't possible," I stammered. "I didn't take these. I'm being set up." But my protests fell on deaf ears. Mom and Emily launched into a tirade, calling me a thief, a liar, hurling insults that cut deeper than any knife. As the officers led me out, I caught a glimpse of Emily's smug smile, hidden behind her hand as she pretended to sob. At the police station, I sat in a stark interrogation room, still in my funeral clothes, trying to make sense of what had happened. Hours passed, and then the door opened. To my surprise, it was my mother who walked in, not a police officer. She dismissed the officer standing guard, insisting on speaking to me alone. As soon as the door closed behind her, Mom's demeanor changed entirely. Gone was the grieving widow, replaced by a cold, calculating woman I barely recognized. "Listen carefully, Erica," she hissed, leaning close. "You have one chance to fix this mess. Give up the inheritance. Sign it over to Emily, and all of this goes away. The charges, the scandal, everything." I stared at her, disbelief warring with a growing sense of betrayal. You set me up? Your own daughter?" Mom's laugh was harsh and humorless. "Oh, please. You stopped being part of this family long ago. Now, you have a choice. Give up the money, or we'll make sure you go to prison. Think about it, Erica. A thief who stole from her own sister at their father's funeral? Your reputation will be ruined. You'll lose everything." I felt sick to my stomach, the full weight of their betrayal crashing down on me. "No," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I won't do it. I didn't steal anything, and I won't let you blackmail me." Mom's eyes flashed with anger. "You ungrateful little rat," she spat. "I hope you enjoy prison. Everyone will know what you did, stealing from your own family. You'll be nothing but a criminal, a disgrace." With that, she turned on her heel and left, slamming the door behind her. I sat there, stunned, tears streaming down my face as the reality of my situation sank in. I was released on bail later that night, stumbling out of the police station into the cool night air. My phone buzzed, a message from my boss at Global Tech. My stomach dropped as I read it. "Erica, I've heard some disturbing rumors. Until the situation is resolved, I think it's best you take some time off. Paid leave, of course. I believe in your innocence, but we need to protect the company's reputation. Take care." I leaned against the cold brick wall of the station, feeling my world crumbling around me. In the span of a day, I'd lost my father, been betrayed by my family, arrested, and now I was on the verge of losing my job. The next morning, I woke up with a renewed sense of purpose. With trembling fingers, I searched online for private investigators in the area. One name stood out, Jack Reeves, a former police detective turned PI with a reputation for solving complex cases. I made the call, my voice steadier than I expected as I explained my situation. "Ms. Thompson," Jack said after I finished my story, "this is a delicate situation. Family conspiracies are never easy to prove. But if what you're saying is true, we'll find evidence. It won't be cheap, though." I thought of the inheritance I was fighting for. Money's not an issue. I need to clear my name and expose what they've done. The next 3 weeks were a blur of clandestine meetings with Jack, anxious waiting, and sleepless nights. I threw myself into my dance classes on weekends, desperate for any distraction from the constant worry. My phone remained silent, no calls from work, no more threats from my family. The silence was almost worse than the conflict. Then, one rainy afternoon, my phone rang. It was Jack. "Erica," he said, his voice grave. "I've got news, but you're not going to like it." My heart sank. "What is it, Jack?" He sighed heavily. "I've been following your mother and sister, trying to catch them discussing the inheritance or the theft. But they're careful, too careful. They never talk about it in public, and I can't legally bug their homes." I felt the last glimmer of hope fading. "So that's it? There's nothing we can do?" "Not exactly," Jack replied, a note of hesitation in his voice. "I did find something, but it's not related to your case. It's about your sister." I sat up straighter. "What about her?" "She's having an affair, Erica. I have photographic evidence of her entering a hotel with a young man, definitely not her husband. I also managed to record some of their conversations. It's not flattering to her husband, to say the least." For a moment, I sat in stunned silence. Then, slowly, a plan began to form in my mind. "Jack," I said, my voice low and determined, "I need you to send me everything you have on this. And I mean everything. As soon as I hung up, I sprang into action. I spent the next hour poring over the photos and recordings Jack sent, my mind racing with possibilities. Finally, I made a decision. I selected the most damning photo, my sister entering the hotel with her young lover, and sent it to her husband's phone with a simple message. Interested in knowing what happened next? Meet me at Café Luna tomorrow at 2 p.m. The next day, I arrived at the cafe early, my nerves on edge. At exactly 2 p.m., Emily's husband walked in, his face a mask of barely contained fury and curiosity. "What's this about, Erica?" he demanded as he sat down across from me. I took a deep breath. "I think you know, James. But what you've seen is just the tip of the iceberg." Over the next hour, I laid out everything I had. The photos, the recordings of Emily laughing about James's age, mocking his performance in bed, discussing her plans to leave him once she got her hands on the full inheritance. James sat in stunned silence, his face growing paler with each revelation. When I finished, he looked up at me, his eyes blazing with a mixture of pain and rage. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice hoarse. I leaned forward. "I want justice, James. And I think you do too. Help me prove that they framed me, and we can both get what we deserve." A few days after my meeting with James, my phone buzzed with a message. It was from him, containing several audio files. My heart raced as I pressed play on the first one. Emily's voice filled the air. "Can you believe how easy it was to plant that jewelry in Erica's purse?" My mother's laughter followed. "I know. The look on her face when the police found it was priceless. Well, she'll have no choice but to give it up now." I listened to file after file, each one filled with their callous plotting and cruel laughter. A mix of vindication and disgust washed over me. Finally, I had the proof I needed. The day of the will reading arrived quickly. I entered the notary's office, my stomach in knots, but my resolve firm. Mom and Emily were already there, shooting me smug looks. James sat quietly in the corner, giving me an almost imperceptible nod. The notary, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses, cleared his throat. "Let's begin," he said, unfolding the document before him. He read through the will, detailing the distribution of assets, just as Dad had explained that day at the house. As he finished, I stood up. "If I may," I said, my voice steadier than I felt, "there's something I need to address before we conclude." Mom's eyes lit up, and she nodded approvingly. "I'm glad you've finally come to your senses, Erica. I knew you'd make the right decision and give up the inheritance." Mom and Emily exchanged triumphant glances, their faces beaming with anticipation. But I was about to disappoint them. "I'm afraid you've misunderstood," I said, pulling out my phone. "I think you'll all want to hear this." I pressed play, and the room filled with their voices, gleefully discussing how they had framed me for theft. As the recording played, I watched the color drain from their faces. Emily let out a strangled gasp, while Mom sat rigid, her lips pressed into a thin line. When it ended, chaos erupted. "You lying scum!" Emily screeched, lunging towards me. "How dare you!" Mom hissed, her composure cracking. "You ungrateful, scheming." I recorded those conversations. James suddenly spoke up, his voice cutting through the commotion. The room descended into madness. Emily was screaming at James, Mom was hurling insults at me, and I stood there, watching it all unfold. "Silence!" The notary's voice boomed, startling us all into quiet. "This is a legal proceeding, not a circus. Everyone will calm down this instant, or I'll have you all removed." As the notary's words echoed through the room, a heavy silence fell. It was broken by James, who stood up abruptly, his face a mask of barely contained fury. "Since we're airing dirty laundry," he said, his voice trembling with anger, "I have something to add." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a photograph, slapping it down on the table in front of Emily. Emily's face drained of color as she stared at the image. It showed her entering a hotel with a man who was decidedly not her husband. "I know everything, Emily," James spat. "Your affair, your lies, all of it. I'm filing for divorce, and thanks to our prenup, you won't see a penny. You'll be paying me compensation for your infidelity." Emily's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water, no words coming out. Mom looked between Emily and James, her expression a mix of shock and dawning horror as she realized their carefully constructed world was crumbling around them. Suddenly, the door to the notary's office swung open. 2 police officers walked in, their faces stern. Mary and Emily Thompson, one of them asked, though it was clear he already knew who they were. Mom and Emily looked up, tears streaking their faces. "You're under arrest for false accusations of theft and attempted blackmail," the officer continued. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." As the police read them their rights and handcuffed them, I watched with a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. This was justice, but it was also the final nail in the coffin of our family relationship. I walked out of the office behind the police, watching as they put Mom and Emily into separate patrol cars. As the sirens faded into the distance, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. It was over. Taking out my phone, I dialed a familiar number. "Erica," my boss's voice came through, sounding concerned. "Is everything all right?" "Better than all right," I replied, a smile in my voice. "I can explain everything now. The accusations against me were false, and I have proof." I gave him a brief rundown of what had happened. As I finished, I heard him let out a low whistle. "Erica, I'm so sorry you had to go through all that," he said, genuine sympathy in his voice. "But I'm glad the truth came out. Listen, your job is still here whenever you're ready to come back. In fact, I'd be delighted to see you at work as soon as you feel up to it." The weeks following the confrontation at the notary's office were a whirlwind of legal proceedings and life-changing decisions. As the truth came to light, the charges against me were quickly dropped. The relief I felt was indescribable, like a weight I'd been carrying for months suddenly lifted from my shoulders. But for Mom and Emily, the nightmare was just beginning. They faced charges of false accusation and attempted blackmail. The trial was swift and damning, with the recorded evidence leaving no room for doubt. In the end, they were found guilty on all counts. The judge, a stern-faced woman with piercing eyes, looked down at them from her bench. In addition to the criminal penalties, this court orders Mary and Emily Thompson to pay substantial damages to Erica Thompson for emotional distress and damage to her reputation. The fine was staggering. Mom's face went pale as the amount was read out, while Emily burst into tears. In the days that followed, I watched from a distance as their lives unraveled. Mom, with no other choice, was forced to sell the apartment Dad had left her. It was a beautiful place in the heart of the city, but now it slipped from her grasp, the proceeds going straight to me as part of the damages. Emily's situation was even more dire. The house she'd been so smug about inheriting had to be sold to cover her part of the fine. I couldn't help but feel a twinge of satisfaction as I remembered her gloating face the day Dad announced his will. But Emily's troubles didn't end there. James, true to his word, filed for divorce. He demanded the compensation outlined in their prenuptial agreement for her infidelity. What little money was left from the sale of the house went straight to him. In the span of a few short months, Mom and Emily had lost everything. Their comfortable lives, their social standing, their financial security, all of it gone. They were left with nothing but the consequences of their own actions. As for me, I found myself in a position I'd never dreamed possible. With the inheritance from Dad and the damages from Mom and Emily, I had more money than I knew what to do with. After much thought, I decided to buy a beautiful apartment in a quiet part of town. It was everything I'd ever wanted in a home, spacious, bright, and most importantly, mine. The rest of the money, I invested carefully. I spent hours researching, consulting with financial advisors, and making prudent decisions. My goal was to ensure a steady income for years to come, to build the security that I'd always longed for. As I stood in my new apartment, looking out over the city skyline, I couldn't help but reflect on the tumultuous journey that had brought me here. The pain, the betrayal, the fight for justice, it had all led to this moment. I thought of Mom and Emily, now struggling to make ends meet. Part of me felt sorry for them, but a larger part knew that they were facing the consequences of their own choices. They had tried to take everything from me, and in the end, they'd lost it all themselves. My phone buzzed with a message from my boss, confirming my return to work next week. I smiled, looking forward to getting back to normal, or rather, my new normal. My name is Kelly, and I married Tom when I was young and full of dreams. We'd been high school sweethearts, and I thought we'd be happy forever. My father, a successful businessman who owned a furniture factory, gave us a beautiful house as a wedding gift. 3 years after the wedding, our son Michael was born. As the years passed, I threw myself into being the perfect housewife and mother. I kept our home spotless, cooked gourmet meals, and made sure Michael had everything he needed. Tom's career as a sales manager wasn't progressing as quickly as he'd hoped. One night, he came home frustrated and angry. "Damn it, Kelly. I can't take this anymore. I'm busting my ass at work, and for what? Pennies." He slammed his fist on the kitchen table, making me jump. "What do you want me to do about it?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. Tom's eyes lit up. "Your father. He could give me a job at his factory. A senior position. You could talk to him, couldn't you?" I hesitated. My father had always been fair in his business dealings, and I didn't want to take advantage of our relationship. But seeing the desperation in Tom's eyes, I nodded. "Okay, I'll talk to him." The next day, I visited my father at his office. "Dad, I need to ask you something," I began nervously. "It's about Tom. He's not happy with his job, and I was wondering if you might have a position for him here at the factory?" After a long moment, my father nodded. "All right, I'll give him a shot. But he'll have to prove himself like anyone else." When I told Tom the news, he was ecstatic. He picked me up and spun me around the kitchen. "You're amazing, Kelly. This is going to change everything for us." And for a while, it did. Tom started earning more money, and our financial worries eased. But as one problem faded, another grew in its place: my relationship with Tom's mother, Helen. Helen was a force of nature, fiercely protective of her only son and openly disapproving of me. She'd drop by unannounced, criticize my housekeeping, and demand my constant attention. One afternoon, as I was trying to get dinner ready, Helen burst through the front door. "Kelly, I need you to take me shopping right now." I gritted my teeth. "Helen, I'm in the middle of cooking. Can it wait until tomorrow?" Her eyes narrowed. "Are you saying my needs aren't important? After all I've done for this family?" I bit back a retort, knowing it would only make things worse. "Of course not. Just give me a few minutes to finish up here." As I drove Helen to the mall, listening to her complaints about my driving, my cooking, and pretty much everything else, I couldn't help but wonder how my life had become this way. I was an intelligent, capable woman, yet here I was, catering to everyone else's whims while my own dreams gathered dust. One particularly frustrating afternoon, Helen barged into our home unannounced, as usual. "Kelly," she called out, her voice grating on my already frayed nerves. "I'm hungry. Make me something to eat." Biting my tongue, I set aside the laundry and trudged to the kitchen. As I prepared a meal for Helen, she sat at the kitchen table, criticizing my every move. "You're using too much oil," she snapped. "And for heaven's sake, cut those vegetables smaller. Don't you know how to cook properly?" As I placed the finished meal in front of her, I hoped she'd eat quickly and leave. But to my dismay, she packed up all the food I'd prepared and stood up. "I'll be taking this with me," she announced. "I have bridge club tonight, and this will do nicely for snacks." I stared at her in disbelief. "But Helen, that was supposed to be our dinner." "Oh, you can always make more," she said, already heading for the door. "It's not like you have anything better to do with your time." As the door slammed behind her, I sank into a chair, feeling defeated. I glanced at the clock, realizing I now had less than an hour to prepare another meal before Tom got home from work. When Tom arrived, he found me frantically trying to get dinner on the table. "What's going on?" he asked, loosening his tie. "Why isn't dinner ready?" I explained what had happened with his mother, hoping for some understanding or support. Instead, Tom's face darkened. "Mom was here, and you didn't make her feel welcome?" he demanded. "Kelly, you know how important family is to me. You should have been more accommodating." "Accommodating?" I echoed, incredulous. "Tom, she took our dinner. She treats me like a servant in my own home." Tom shook his head, clearly annoyed. "You're exaggerating. Mom just wants to feel loved and appreciated." "Is that too much to ask?" As we ate the hastily prepared meal in silence, I couldn't help but feel a growing distance between us. Tom, once my high school sweetheart and closest confidant, now felt like a stranger across the dinner table. One evening, Tom came home from work in a foul mood. His face was red with anger as he slammed the front door behind him. "Kelly," he bellowed. "Your father is a tyrant, a despot. He humiliates people and uses them like pawns in his little game." I was taken aback. My father had always been fair and kind in my experience. "What happened?" I asked cautiously. Tom's eyes flashed with fury. "I stood up for an employee today. Your father was treating him unfairly, and I couldn't stand by and watch. And you know what your precious daddy did? He fired me on the spot." My mind reeled. This didn't sound like my father at all. "There must be some mistake," I said. "Let me talk to Dad and hear his side." "No," Tom roared, causing me to flinch. "You will not speak to your father. You will not speak to your mother. As far as we're concerned, they no longer exist for us. Do you understand?" Trembling, I nodded, too shocked and scared to argue further. In the days that followed, Tom found another job. He started earning well again, but the incident had changed something fundamental in our relationship. The warmth and love I once felt for him was replaced by fear and resentment. Years passed, and our son Michael grew up. He often asked about his grandparents, but Tom would shut down any conversation about them. "You have one grandmother," he would say firmly. "My mother. That's all you need to know." As Michael prepared to leave for college in another city, I felt a mix of pride and sadness. My baby was growing up, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was losing the only ally I had in this house. Over the next few years, my life fell into a monotonous routine. I catered to Tom's every whim and endured Helen's constant criticism. Without Michael as a buffer, their treatment of me grew even more oppressive. One afternoon, as I was scrubbing the kitchen floor under Helen's watchful eye, the phone rang. I reached for it, but Helen snatched it away. "I'll answer it," she snapped. "You focus on getting that floor clean. I can still see spots." I gritted my teeth and returned to my task, but I couldn't help overhearing Helen's side of the conversation. "Yes, this is the residence of Kelly." "Who? Her father?" Helen's voice dripped with disdain. "I'm sorry, but Kelly isn't available to speak with you. Please don't call again." My head snapped up. "Wait," I called out, but Helen had already hung up the phone. "That was your father," she said coldly. "I told him not to contact you again. You should be thanking me for protecting this family from those toxic people." I felt a surge of anger and frustration. "You had no right to do that," I said, my voice shaking. "He's my father. I should have been allowed to speak to him." Helen's eyes narrowed. "You ungrateful little." Just then, Tom walked in. "What's going on here?" he demanded. Helen immediately put on a hurt expression. "Oh, Tom, your wife is being so disrespectful to me. After all I do for this family." Tom turned to me, his face dark with anger. "Is this true, Kelly? Are you disrespecting my mother?" I opened my mouth to explain, but the words wouldn't come. I realized with a sinking heart that it didn't matter what I said. Tom would always take Helen's side. A year passed since that fateful phone call from my father. Life continued its suffocating routine, with Tom and Helen's control over me growing tighter by the day. Then, on a crisp autumn morning, everything changed. The phone rang while I was preparing breakfast. Tom was in the shower, and Helen hadn't arrived for her daily inspection of my housekeeping. For once, I was able to answer without interference. "Hello?" I said tentatively. "Kelly? Is that you?" The voice on the other end was familiar, yet distant, my father's voice. "Kelly, it's your mother. She's very ill. The doctors, they don't think she has much time left. She needs you. We both do." Just then, I heard the bathroom door open. Tom would be down any minute. "I'll try, Dad. I promise I'll try," I whispered before quickly hanging up. When Tom entered the kitchen, I was fighting to compose myself. "Who was that on the phone?" he asked suspiciously. I took a deep breath. "It was my father. My mother is very ill, Tom. She's dying. I need to go see her." Tom's face hardened. "Absolutely not. We've been through this, Kelly. Your parents don't exist for us anymore." I felt something snap inside me. For the first time in years, I stood up to him. "I'm going, Tom. With or without your permission. She's my mother, and I won't let her die without saying goodbye." Tom's jaw clenched. "Fine. One day. That's all you get. And then you come back home where you belong." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. One day was better than nothing. With shaking hands, I called my son Michael and told him what was happening. To my surprise and relief, he immediately offered to accompany me. The next morning, Michael and I set off for my childhood home. When we arrived, my father met us at the door. He looked older than I remembered, grief etching deep lines in his face. Without a word, he pulled me into a tight embrace. He led us to my mother's room. She lay in bed, pale and frail, but her eyes lit up when she saw me. "Kelly," she whispered, reaching out a trembling hand. "My baby girl." I rushed to her side, clasping her hand in mine. "Mom, I'm here. I'm so sorry. Can you ever forgive me?" She smiled weakly. "There's nothing to forgive, sweetheart. I'm just glad you're here now." We spent the day by her bedside, sharing memories and making up for lost time. As the sun began to set, my mother's breathing became labored. She squeezed my hand and looked into my eyes. "Kelly," she said softly. "Promise me you'll live your life. Really live it. Don't let anyone cage your spirit again." Tears streamed down my face as I nodded. "I promise, Mom. I promise." She smiled one last time, then closed her eyes. Her hand went limp in mine. She was gone. Suddenly, my phone began to ring incessantly. I knew without looking that it was Tom. I answered the call, moving to the hallway for privacy. Tom's voice, sharp with anger, cut through the line. "Where the hell are you, Kelly? You were supposed to be back hours ago." "Tom, I can't leave yet," I stammered, my voice thick with emotion. "My mother just passed away. I need to stay for the funeral." "Absolutely not," he roared. "I told you one day, and that's all you get. If you're not back by tomorrow, don't bother coming back at all." His words hung in the air, a threat and a promise all at once. For a moment, I was tempted to give in, to rush back to the life I knew. But then I remembered my mother's last words, urging me to live my life fully. "Fine," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I'm staying." I ended the call before he could respond, my heart pounding. I had just defied Tom for the first time in our married life, and it was both terrifying and exhilarating. The next few days passed in a blur of grief and preparations. On the day of the funeral, as we stood solemnly around my mother's grave, my phone began to ring again. Tom's number flashed on the screen. Without thinking, I pressed the speaker button, if only to quickly silence it. Tom's voice, loud and angry, burst forth for all to hear. "Kelly, this is your last chance," he yelled. If you don't come home right now, I swear I'll come and drag you back myself. You ungrateful filth, after everything I've done for you. I quickly ended the call, my face burning with shame and anger. The mourners around us looked shocked, and Michael's face was a mask of fury. My father looked more concerned than anything else. He pulled me aside as soon as the service was over. "Kelly," he said gently, "we need to talk." We walked to a quiet corner of the cemetery, and my father took a deep breath. "Sweetheart, there's something you need to know about Tom. Something I should have told you years ago." I listened in stunned silence as my father revealed the truth about why Tom had really left the company all those years ago. It wasn't because he had stood up for an employee. It was because my father had caught him stealing money from the company and clients, manipulating prices, and pocketing the difference. "I fired him to protect the company and our clients," my father explained. "I didn't tell you because I thought you loved him, and I didn't want to come between you. But now, hearing how he speaks to you, seeing what your life has become, I can't stay silent anymore." I felt as if the ground had opened up beneath my feet. All these years, I had believed Tom's lies, allowed him to cut me off from my family, endured his and Helen's emotional abuse. And it had all been based on a lie. "There's more," my father continued, his voice grave. "I recently heard from a friend that Tom's company is under investigation. There are discrepancies, Kelly. I think he might be up to his old tricks again." As the full impact of his words hit me, I felt a strange mix of despair and liberation. The life I had known was crumbling around me, but from its ashes, I saw a chance for a new beginning. The day after the funeral, my father, Michael, and I decided to return to my house. To our surprise, we found the house bustling with activity. Helen's friends were milling about, and the smell of food wafted from the open windows. We walked in to find a full-blown party in progress. Helen, holding a glass of wine, spotted us first. Her eyes narrowed as she took in my father and Michael. "Well, look who finally decided to grace us with her presence," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "You're late, Kelly. My birthday celebration started hours ago." I was momentarily stunned. In all the turmoil of the past few days, I had completely forgotten about Helen's birthday. Before I could respond, she thrust a dirty rag into my hands. "Don't just stand there," she snapped. "Start cleaning up. These tables won't wipe themselves." My father, who had been silently observing, suddenly erupted. "How dare you speak to my daughter that way?" he thundered, causing the room to fall silent. "She's not a dog to follow your commands. She's a grown woman who deserves respect." Helen laughed derisively. "Respect? She gave up any right to respect when she married my son. Her family is Tom and me now. You're nothing to her anymore." I watched in disbelief as my father and Helen argued, their voices rising. The party guests looked uncomfortable, unsure whether to leave or stay. Suddenly, Tom burst into the room. "What the hell is going on here?" he demanded, his eyes locking onto me. "Kelly, why aren't you serving the guests? And what are they doing here?" He gestured angrily towards my father and Michael. Something inside me snapped. Years of pent-up frustration and anger came pouring out. "No, Tom," I said, my voice steady and clear. "I'm not serving anyone. I'm not cleaning up. And I'm not staying silent anymore." The room had gone deathly quiet. Even Helen seemed at a loss for words. "I know the truth, Tom," I continued, pulling out the divorce papers I had hastily prepared. "I know why you really left my father's company. And I'm done. I want a divorce." For a moment, Tom looked like he might lunge at me. But then, perhaps realizing he was outnumbered, he deflated. "Fine," he snarled. "Take your divorce. But don't think you'll get a penny from me." I couldn't help but laugh. "This house is mine, Tom. My father gave it to us as a wedding gift, remember? You're the one who needs to leave." Tom and Helen left shortly after, shooting venomous glares our way. As the door closed behind them, I sank onto the couch, suddenly exhausted. Michael, who had been quietly observing everything, finally spoke up. "Mom, why didn't you tell me things were so bad?" "I'm sorry, Michael," I said. "I thought I was protecting you. But I realize now that I was just teaching you the wrong lessons about love and respect." In the weeks that followed, my life transformed dramatically. The divorce proceedings began, and I threw myself into rebuilding my life. My father, true to his word, stood by me every step of the way. One afternoon, as we sat in his study discussing the future, my father broached a subject I hadn't expected. "Kelly," he began, his voice gentle but serious, "I've been thinking. I'm not getting any younger, and the factory needs new blood. How would you feel about coming to work with me?" I blinked in surprise. "Me? But Dad, I don't know anything about running a business." He chuckled. "Neither did I when I started. You're smart, Kelly. You can learn. Besides, it's about time you had a chance to spread your wings." Over the next few months, I immersed myself in learning the business. My father was a patient teacher, guiding me through the intricacies of running a furniture factory. I discovered a passion for design and innovation that I never knew I had. Meanwhile, the divorce proceedings dragged on. Tom, true to form, fought me every step of the way. He contested the ownership of the house, and even attempted to turn Michael against me. In the end, justice prevailed. I was awarded the house and substantial financial compensation for years of emotional abuse. Tom, facing charges for his fraudulent activities, found himself deep in debt and unable to hold senior positions anymore. As for Helen, she faded into the background, her influence over my life finally broken. The last I heard, she had moved in with a distant relative. Her social circle diminished after the truth about Tom came out. 3 years passed in what felt like a blink of an eye. Then, one sunny morning, my father called me into his office. His face was solemn as he gestured for me to sit. "Kelly," he said, his voice heavy with emotion, "I'm not well. The doctors, they don't think I have much time left." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. "Dad, no," I whispered, reaching for his hand. He squeezed my fingers gently. "It's okay, sweetheart. I've had a good life. And now, I can go knowing that you're strong, that you're free, that you'll be okay." Tears streamed down my face as he continued. "I'm leaving everything to you, Kelly. The business, the house, all of it. You've more than proven yourself. I know you'll take good care of it all." In the weeks that followed, we spent as much time together as possible. My father's condition deteriorated rapidly, but his spirit remained strong. He passed away peacefully in his sleep, leaving behind a legacy that I was now responsible for carrying forward. The news of my father's passing and my inheritance spread quickly through our small town. I was still adjusting to my new reality when an unexpected visitor arrived at my doorstep. It was a crisp autumn afternoon when I heard the doorbell ring. Opening the door, I was shocked to see Tom standing there, a bouquet of flowers in his hand and an apologetic look on his face. "Kelly," he said, his voice softer than I'd heard it in years. "I'm so sorry about your father. May I come in?" Warily, I stepped aside to let him enter. We stood in the foyer, an awkward silence hanging between us. Finally, Tom spoke. "I've been doing a lot of thinking, Kelly. About us, about our life together. I know I made mistakes, terrible mistakes. But I've changed. My mother, she passed away last month. She was the one who always came between us. Now, there's nothing stopping us from being happy together again." As I opened my mouth to respond, I heard the sound of a car pulling up in the driveway. A moment later, the front door opened, and a tall, distinguished-looking man walked in. "Kelly, darling, I'm home," he called out, then stopped short when he saw Tom. Tom looked between us, confusion and anger dawning on his face. "Who the hell is this?" he demanded. The man stepped forward, extending his hand to Tom. "I'm David, Kelly's husband. And you are?" Tom ignored the outstretched hand, his face contorting with rage. "Husband? What the hell, Kelly? You remarried? You traitor. David's expression hardened. He stepped between Tom and me, his voice low and dangerous. I suggest you leave now, and never speak to my wife that way again. Tom lunged forward, but David was quicker. He caught Tom by the arm and firmly escorted him to the door. This is your only warning, David said calmly. Stay away from Kelly. If you ever come near her or insult her again, you'll regret it. With that, he shut the door in Tom's face. As the sound of screeching tires faded away, David turned to me, his face softening with concern. Are you okay, love? I nodded, stepping into his embrace. I'm fine. I'm just glad you're home. I looked up at him, a smile playing on my lips. And I'm glad you waited for me after all these years. David chuckled, pressing a kiss to my forehead. I've loved you since high school, Kelly. I would have waited forever if I had to. As we stood there in each other's arms, I marveled at how life had come full circle. David and I had been high school sweethearts before Tom came into the picture. After my divorce, we had reconnected, and our old feelings had blossomed anew. We'd married in a quiet ceremony 6 months ago, starting a new chapter in both our lives. Just then, my phone buzzed with a text. It was from Michael. Mom, great news. Jessica's pregnant. You're going to be a grandmother. In the months that followed, life settled into a beautiful rhythm. Michael and his wife Jessica moved back to our city, eager to be close to family as they prepared for their baby's arrival. They joined us at the factory, bringing fresh ideas and energy to the business. I remember that day like it was yesterday, even though I was only 5 years old. My name is Jenna, and that was the day my life changed forever. Dad had gone on another business trip, leaving Mom and me alone in our suburban house. I was playing with my dolls in the living room when I heard the doorbell ring. Mom rushed to answer it, her face lighting up as she saw who was there. Jenna, honey, go to your room and play, she said, her voice trembling with excitement. I did as I was told, but curiosity got the better of me. I peeked around the corner and saw a tall man I didn't recognize. Mom was throwing clothes into a suitcase, moving faster than I'd ever seen her move before. Mom zipped up her suitcase and headed for the door. I stepped out of my hiding place, confused and scared. Mommy, where are you going? I have to go away for a while, sweetie, she said, not quite meeting my eyes. Be a good girl for Daddy, okay? And just like that, she was gone. No hug, no kiss goodbye. Just the sound of a car engine starting and then fading away into the distance. I stood there, staring at the closed door, waiting for her to come back. But she didn't. The house felt bigger and emptier than ever before. As night fell, I grew more scared. I tried to turn on the lights, but I was too short to reach the switches. The darkness closed in around me, and I started to cry. Mommy, Daddy. I called out, over and over again. But no one came. I don't know how many days passed. I was hungry and thirsty, and the dark seemed to be alive, full of monsters waiting to grab me. I cried until I had no tears left, then huddled in a corner, shaking with fear. Finally, I heard voices outside. Our neighbor, Mrs. Johnson, was talking to someone. I've been hearing a child crying for days, she was saying. I'm worried something might have happened. The door burst open, and suddenly the house was full of people. Policemen, neighbors, and finally, my dad. Jen, he cried, scooping me up in his arms. Oh God, Jenna, I'm so sorry. I clung to him, sobbing with relief. Over his shoulder, I saw a policeman holding a piece of paper. Mr. Anderson, he said gravely. I think you should read this. Dad set me down gently and took the note. As he read it, his face crumpled. He looked older suddenly, like he'd aged years in just a few moments. She's gone, he whispered. Linda's gone. She left us. The next few weeks were a blur. Dad took time off work to stay with me. We had lots of visitors, relatives, friends, and a nice lady who Dad said was a child psychologist. "Jenna's been through a traumatic experience," the psychologist explained to Dad. "It's normal for her to have some fears and anxieties after what happened." And boy, did I have fears. I couldn't sleep without a light on, the dark terrified me. And I panicked whenever Dad had to leave, afraid he wouldn't come back either. The fear never really went away. It became a part of me, as much a part of my identity as my brown hair or green eyes. Jenna Anderson, the girl whose mother left her, the girl afraid of the dark, the girl always worried about being abandoned. As the days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, life settled into a new normal. Dad and I became a team of two, figuring out how to navigate this new world without Mom. He learned to braid my hair, badly at first, but he got better with practice, and I learned how to make his coffee just the way he liked it. That changed the day Dad met Helen. I was 7 years old when Dad introduced me to her. Helen had kind eyes and a warm smile that made me feel instantly at ease. Over the next few weeks, Helen became a regular presence in our lives. She didn't try to replace my mom, something I appreciated more than I could express. Instead, she carved out her own space in our little family. One day, I overheard Dad talking to her on the phone. "I think it's time, Helen. Will you move in with us?" Helen moved in a week later. She didn't try to be my mom, but she became something just as important, a friend. She helped me with my homework, braided my hair much better than Dad ever could, and always made sure there was a nightlight in my room. As the years passed, our lives changed in other ways too. Dad's company took off, and suddenly we were moving to a big new house in a fancy neighborhood. I got my own room with a walk-in closet and a view of the backyard pool. But some things didn't change. I still slept with a nightlight. I still worried every time Dad went on a business trip. And sometimes, late at night, I'd catch Dad looking at old photos of Mom. My 10th birthday started like any other day. I woke up to the smell of pancakes, Helen's special birthday tradition for me. Dad was home from work, and we were planning a small party later. Everything seemed perfect. Then the doorbell rang. As I walked into the living room, I froze. Standing there, looking older but unmistakable, was my mother. And next to her was a little girl, about 5 years old, clutching a teddy bear and looking around wide-eyed. "Linda," Dad said, his voice tight. "What are you doing here?" Mom took a deep breath. "Tom, I'm so sorry. For everything. I know I have no right to be here, but..." She gestured to the little girl. "This is Emma. She's your daughter." The room went silent. I felt like I couldn't breathe. Dad's face went through a range of emotions: shock, anger, disbelief, and then, something else. "My daughter?" he repeated. Mom nodded. "I was pregnant when I left. I didn't know then, I swear. Tom, I've made so many mistakes. I'm not asking you to forgive me, but Emma, she deserves to know her father." I watched as Dad knelt down to the little girl's level. "Hi Emma," he said softly. I'm your dad." Emma looked up at him shyly. "Hi," she whispered. As Dad talked to Emma, I noticed Helen standing in the doorway, her face pale. She turned and walked away quickly. I wanted to follow her, but I felt rooted to the spot. The next few hours were a blur. There were lots of adult conversations I wasn't supposed to hear, raised voices, tears. I hid in my room, hugging my knees to my chest and trying to make sense of it all. Later that evening, Dad came to talk to me. "Jenna," he said, sitting on the edge of my bed. "I know this is a lot to take in. Your mom, she's made some big mistakes. But Emma, she's innocent in all this. She's your sister. I've decided to give your mom another chance. For Emma's sake." The next day, I watched from my window as Helen packed her car. She looked up and saw me watching. With tears in her eyes, she waved goodbye. I waved back, feeling like a part of me was leaving with her. Mom and Emma moved in that same day. Emma took the guest room and Mom took her old place in Dad's room. It felt wrong, like she was erasing the last 5 years as if they never happened. The years that followed were complicated. Mom was back, but it wasn't the happy family reunion I might have dreamed of when I was younger. She doted on Emma, showering her with attention and affection. But with me, there was always a distance, an awkwardness that never quite went away. As for Emma, well, she was just a kid. She didn't ask to be born into this mess, and I tried not to resent her. But it was hard, especially when I saw how easily she fit into Mom and Dad's life, in a way I never seemed to. By the time I turned 18, I was more than ready to leave for college. I had chosen to study zoology. Animals had always been easier for me to understand than people. They didn't judge, didn't have complicated emotions or messy family histories. They just were. The day I left for college was bittersweet. Dad hugged me tight, his eyes misty. "I'm so proud of you, Jenna," he said. "You're going to do great things." Mom gave me an awkward pat on the shoulder. "Good luck," she said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. Emma, now 13, rolled her eyes. "Finally get my own room," she muttered. I pretended not to hear her, focusing instead on Dad's warm embrace. College was freeing. For the first time, I was away from the tension at home, the constant reminder of my complicated family situation. I threw myself into my studies, finding solace in the world of animals and nature. But even as I excelled academically, I struggled socially. Years of feeling like an outsider in my own family had left their mark. I was quiet, reserved, always afraid of getting too close to people. What if they left, like Mom had? What if they replaced me, like Emma seemed to have done? Instead, I found comfort in the college's small zoo. I volunteered there in my spare time, caring for the animals. There was a particularly grumpy old llama named Larry who became my favorite. He didn't like most people, but he seemed to tolerate me. The years at college flew by, and before I knew it, I was graduating. As I stood in my cap and gown, diploma in hand, I scanned the crowd. Dad was there, beaming with pride. Mom and Emma were there too, clapping politely. "Congratulations, Jenna," Mom said stiffly. "Your father and I have been talking, and, well, we think it's time you started looking for your own place. You know, spread your wings." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. I looked at Dad, hoping he'd contradict her, but he just looked away, his expression pained. "Right," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Of course. I'll start looking right away." The days following my graduation were tense. I was back in my childhood home, but it felt anything but welcoming. Dad tried his best to make me feel comfortable, but Mom and Emma made it clear that I was an unwanted guest. "Jenna, have you started looking for jobs yet?" Mom would ask over breakfast, her tone falsely sweet. "You know, it's important to get your foot in the door early." Emma would chime in, "Yeah, and maybe you could find your own place too. It's getting kind of cramped around here." Nights were the hardest. I still needed my nightlight to sleep, a fact that didn't escape Emma's notice. One evening, as I was getting ready for bed, she barged into my room. "Seriously?" she scoffed, pointing at my nightlight. "You're 22 and you still need that? No wonder you don't have any friends." I felt my cheeks burn with shame. "Leave me alone, Emma," I muttered. But Emma wasn't done. At dinner the next day, she brought it up again, this time in front of everyone. "Hey, Mom, Dad," she said, her voice dripping with mock concern. "Don't you think Jenna should see a therapist or something? I mean, she's an adult who's afraid of the dark and can't make friends. That's not normal, right?" I felt something snap inside me. Years of pent-up hurt and anger came flooding out. "You want to know why I'm like this, Emma?" I said, my voice shaking. "It's because when I was 5, my mother left me alone in a dark, empty house for days. Do you have any idea what that does to a child?" The table went silent. Dad looked down at his plate, his face a mask of guilt and pain. Mom's eyes widened in shock, then quickly filled with tears. "How dare you?" she cried, her voice rising dramatically. "How can you be so cruel and vindictive? I've tried so hard to make amends, to be a family again, and this is how you repay me?" As Mom continued her tearful tirade and Emma smirked triumphantly, I realized something: I couldn't live here anymore. This wasn't my home, and these people, they weren't my family. Not really. From that day on, I threw myself into job hunting with renewed vigor. Then, finally, a glimmer of hope. I had an interview scheduled at a small wildlife rehabilitation center. It wasn't glamorous, but it was a start. I left the house that morning feeling cautiously optimistic. But when I arrived, I found a hastily scribbled note on the door. "Interviews canceled due to unforeseen circumstances. We apologize for the inconvenience." Disappointed, I headed home earlier than expected. As I unlocked the front door, I heard voices coming from the living room. Mom and Emma, deep in conversation. I was about to announce my presence when I heard my name. "If Jenna wasn't around at all," Emma was saying. "I mean, it's not fair that she gets any of Dad's money. She's not even really part of this family." "I know, sweetie," Mom replied, her voice soothing. "But we have to be patient. Once she moves out, it'll be easier to convince your father to change his will. We just need to keep pushing her to leave." I felt like I'd been doused in ice water. They wanted me gone, not just from the house, but from the family entirely. And they wanted my inheritance too. As I sat on my bed, my mind raced. What should I do? Should I tell Dad? But would he believe me over Mom and Emma? He'd forgiven Mom for abandoning us, after all. He loved them. Maybe he'd take their side. My first stroke of luck came when I saw a job posting for the city zoo. They needed a zoologist to assist with their wildlife rehabilitation program. It wasn't a glamorous position, but it was exactly what I'd been trained for. I sent in my application immediately, and to my surprise and delight, I got called in for an interview. The day of the interview, I stood in front of the zoo's main gate, taking deep breaths to calm my nerves. The interview went better than I could have hoped. The head zoologist, Dr. Martinez, seemed impressed by my knowledge and passion. "You've got the job, Jenna," she said with a warm smile. "Welcome to the team." I could have cried with relief. Finally, something was going right. Working at the zoo was everything I'd hoped for and more. I spent my days caring for injured wildlife, educating visitors about conservation, and even assisting with research projects. In the evenings, I'd return to my tiny apartment, which I was able to rent with the money I saved. To combat the loneliness, I started participating in online forums for animal lovers and people with similar interests. That's where I met Jake. Jake was from the same city, shared my love for animals, and had a wicked sense of humor that made me laugh even on my toughest days. We started chatting regularly, sharing stories about our day and discussing everything from the latest conservation efforts to our favorite books. One day, Jake suggested we exchange photos. With trembling hands, I sent him a recent picture of me at the zoo. He responded with a photo of himself. He had kind eyes and a warm smile that made my heart skip a beat. But as much as I enjoyed our chats, the idea of meeting in person or even admitting my growing feelings terrified me. What if he rejected me once he got to know the real me? What if he left, just like Mom had? It was around this time that I started corresponding with Lily, a girl I met on a support forum for people with childhood trauma. She understood my fears in a way no one else had before. "You know what helps me?" Lily wrote one day. "I write emails to the people I can't talk to in real life. I pour out everything I'm feeling, all the things I wish I could say. But I don't send them, I just save them as drafts. It's really cathartic." Taking Lily's advice, I started writing emails to Dad. In them, I told him everything, about overhearing Mom and Emma's conversation, about how hurt I felt that he didn't seem to notice me anymore, about how I felt like an outsider in my own family. I started writing to Jake too. In these emails, I allowed myself to be vulnerable in a way I couldn't be in our chats. Jake, I wrote, I think I'm falling for you. But I'm scared. I'm scared of letting anyone get close to me. I'm scared of being hurt again. These emails too remained unsent, my feelings hidden away in the safety of my drafts folder. Dad called occasionally, his voice a mixture of concern and confusion. Jenna, honey, he'd say, why don't you come over for dinner this weekend? We miss you. Each time, I'd make up an excuse. Sorry, Dad, I've got a big project at work, or I'm not feeling well this week, maybe next time. It was just another Saturday afternoon. I was at the mall, picking up some essentials, when I heard a familiar voice call my name. Jenna, is that you? I turned around and there she was, Helen, my former stepmother. She looked older, but her kind eyes were just the same. Before I knew it, we were hugging, years of separation melting away in an instant. That's when I noticed the young boy standing beside her, looking up at us curiously. This is my nephew, Mike, Helen explained, ruffling the boy's hair affectionately. I'm raising him now. My sister, she passed away last year. Over coffee, Helen filled me in on her life. After she and Dad split up, she'd been on her own until her sister's death left Mike in her care. We started meeting regularly after that, sometimes just the two of us, sometimes with Mike. One day Helen called and urgently asked to look after Mike. That evening, Mike arrived at my apartment, backpack in tow. As I prepared dinner in my tiny kitchen, I could hear him tapping away on my laptop in the living room. I'd told him he could play games if he finished his homework. When I came out of the kitchen with 2 plates of spaghetti, I found Mike looking guilty, his face pale. Jenna, he said, his voice trembling. I did something bad. I was curious, and I saw these emails in your drafts folder. And I sent them. All of them. I'm so sorry. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Those emails, my private thoughts, my deepest feelings, sent out into the world. To Dad. To Jake. I felt like I couldn't breathe. That night, after Mike left, I lay in bed, my mind racing. What would Dad think? And Jake, oh God, Jake. My phone pinged with a message notification. It was from Jake, but I couldn't bring myself to read it. What if he was disgusted by my feelings? What if he never wanted to speak to me again? I barely slept that night, tossing and turning, imagining all the worst-case scenarios. A few days later, my phone rang. It was Dad. Jenna, he said, his voice serious. We need to talk. Can you meet me at the cafe near your old high school? My heart pounded as I sat across from Dad in the small cafe. He looked tired, his face etched with lines I hadn't noticed before. I got your emails, he said quietly. Jenna, I had no idea you were feeling this way. About your mother, about Emma, about everything. I couldn't meet his eyes, shame and fear warring inside me. Jenna, look at me, Dad said, his voice gentle, but firm. I looked up, surprised to see tears in his eyes. I love you. More than anything in this world. I'm so sorry I made you feel like you weren't important to me. That was never, ever my intention. We talked for hours, really talked, in a way we hadn't in years. About Mom's return, about Emma, about how I'd felt pushed aside and forgotten. Dad listened, really listened, occasionally wiping away a tear. Finally, he stood up. I need some time to process all this, he said. But Jenna, we're going to figure this out. You and me, I promise. As I watched him walk away, I felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. What would happen now? But I didn't have much time to dwell on it because my phone rang again. It was Jake. Jenna, he said, his voice warm. I got your email. And I feel the same way. I've been too scared to say it, but I really like you. Would you like to meet for coffee? My heart soared. Yes, I said, surprising myself with how steady my voice was. I'd love to. The next day, I met Jake at a small coffee shop. He was even more handsome in person, with a kind smile that put me at ease immediately. We talked for hours about our fears, our dreams, our pasts. For the first time in years, I felt truly seen and understood. As autumn leaves began to fall, my phone rang one crisp morning. It was Dad. "Jenna," he said, his voice warm but with an undercurrent of something I couldn't quite place. "I'd like you to come to Thanksgiving dinner. It's important to me that you're there." Something in his tone made me agree. Thanksgiving Day arrived, and I stood on the doorstep of my childhood home, my heart pounding. Jake had offered to come with me for support, but I felt this was something I needed to face on my own. Mom opened the door, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "Jenna, how nice of you to join us." Emma, lounging on the couch, barely looked up from her phone. "Oh, you came." Dad emerged from the kitchen, enveloping me in a warm hug. "I'm glad you're here, sweetheart," he whispered. As we sat down to dinner, the tension was palpable. Mom and Emma exchanged glances, their smiles strained and artificial. Dad, however, seemed oddly calm. Just as Mom began to serve the turkey, Dad cleared his throat. "Before we begin, there's something we need to discuss." He reached down beside his chair and pulled out a thick manila folder. Dad began pulling out documents, laying them on the table. "Linda, Emma, I've known for a while that something wasn't right. So I did some investigating." He held up a bank statement. "First, I discovered regular withdrawals from our accounts that I didn't make. Quite substantial amounts, in fact." Mom's face paled. Emma suddenly found her plate very interesting. Then, Dad continued, pulling out another document. "I hired a private investigator. Linda, he provided photographic evidence of your encounters with a certain gentleman at the Rosewood Hotel." Mom gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Tom, I can explain." But Dad wasn't finished. He pulled out one final document, his hand shaking slightly. "And finally, I had a DNA test done. Emma isn't my biological daughter." The room fell silent. Emma's phone clattered to the floor. Mom looked like she might faint. "I've already spoken to my lawyer," Dad said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "Linda, I'm filing for divorce. And I'm afraid I'll have to ask both you and Emma to leave this house." Mom found her voice, anger replacing shock. "You can't do this. I'll take you for everything you've got." Dad's expression hardened. "Actually, Linda, you won't. If you try to claim any property, I'll countersue for fraud and demand repayment of all the money you've taken, plus what I've spent raising Emma. My lawyer assures me I have a very strong case." Tears streamed down Mom's face as the reality of the situation sank in. Emma sat in stunned silence, her world crumbling around her. In the days that followed, Mom and Emma moved out. Dad and I began to rebuild our relationship, stronger than ever before. We had weekly dinners, long talks, and even started planning a father-daughter road trip. One day, over coffee, Dad hesitantly brought up Helen. "I've been thinking a lot about the past," he said. "About the mistakes I made. I reached out to Helen to apologize. We've been meeting for coffee, talking things through." I smiled, genuinely happy for him. "That's wonderful, Dad. Helen is an amazing woman." As for me, things with Jake were going better than I could have ever imagined. He was patient, kind, and understood my fears and insecurities. With his support, I was even starting to work through my issues in therapy. My name is Amanda, and this is the story of how I survived growing up with a sister who could have given Machiavelli a run for his money. I was born in a small town to ordinary working-class parents. Mom was a receptionist at a local dentist's office, and Dad worked as a mechanic. They were good people, hardworking and honest, but perhaps a bit too trusting for their own good. When I came into the world, it was a difficult birth. The doctors told my mom she wouldn't be able to have any more children. So, for 5 years, I was their miracle baby, their only child. Those first 5 years were nice, normal. I have vague memories of picnics in the park, of Dad teaching me to ride a bike, of Mom reading me bedtime stories. But it all changed when I was 5, and my parents got the shock of their lives. Mom was pregnant again. I remember the day they told me I was going to be a big sister. They were practically glowing with excitement, and I caught their enthusiasm. I imagined having a little sister to play with, to share secrets with, to be best friends with. God, I was so naive. Sarah was born when I was 5.5. From the moment she came home from the hospital, it was like a switch had been flipped. Suddenly, I wasn't the miracle child anymore. Amanda, be quiet. Your sister's sleeping. Amanda, don't touch that. It's for your sister. Amanda, why can't you be more like your sister? It started small, you know? Little things that I brushed off as normal sibling stuff. But as Sarah grew, so did her talents. I remember her 7th birthday. Mom had spent hours on this beautiful cake, covered in delicate sugar roses. It was a work of art. The guests had just arrived when we heard Mom's horrified gasp from the kitchen. The cake was ruined, the roses all but destroyed. And there was Sarah, pointing at me with an accusing finger. Amanda did it, she said, her voice trembling in a way that adults find impossible to disbelieve. I saw her. I stood there, stunned, as Sarah produced my favorite t-shirt, now smeared with cake and frosting. I don't know how she got it, how she planned it all. She was 7, but she had the cunning of someone much older. I spent the rest of the party locked in my bedroom, listening to the muffled sounds of laughter and celebration downstairs. As the sun set and the house quieted, I heard my door creak open. Sarah stood there, a slice of cake in her hand and a smile on her face that sent chills down my spine. Want some cake, big sister? She whispered, her eyes glittering in the dim light. I saved you a piece. With a rose and everything. I stared at her, this young demon in a party dress, and felt the first stirrings of real fear. What kind of 7-year-old could pull off something like this? And more importantly, what else was she capable of? As the years rolled by, Sarah's manipulation tactics only grew more sophisticated. Every day became a new battle, and I was constantly on edge, wondering what she'd do next. When I was 14 and Sarah was 9, I started to notice my school supplies going missing or getting damaged. At first, I thought I was just being careless, misplacing things here and there. But then I started finding my notebooks with pages torn out, pencils broken in half, and textbooks with scribbles all over the important parts. One day, I caught Sarah red-handed, a pair of scissors in her hand and my history essay in shreds on her bedroom floor. "What are you doing?" I yelled, snatching the remains of my homework from her. Sarah's eyes welled up with crocodile tears. I was just trying to help you cut out some pictures for your project," she sniffled. "This isn't a project, it's my essay. It's due tomorrow." But it was too late. Mom had heard the commotion and came running. "What's going on here?" Before I could explain, Sarah burst into full-blown sobs. I was just trying to help Amanda with her homework, but she yelled at me. Mom turned to me, her face a mask of disappointment. "Amanda, how could you? Your sister was only trying to help. Apologize to your sister right now." I stood there, seething with anger and frustration. Sarah peeked at me from behind Mom's legs, a sly smile playing on her lips. "I'm sorry," I gritted out, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. That night, I had to stay up until 3 a.m. rewriting my essay. The next day at school, I could barely keep my eyes open. My teacher wasn't impressed with my sloppy handwriting and obvious fatigue. "Amanda, this isn't like you," she said, frowning at my paper. "Please put more effort into your schoolwork. I'd hate to have to call your parents." But of course, she did end up calling my parents. And of course, they blamed me for not being responsible enough, for not taking my studies seriously. Sarah sat at the dinner table, quietly eating her food with a satisfied smirk, as Mom and Dad lectured me about the importance of education. As I grew older, Sarah's tactics evolved. When I started showing interest in boys in high school, she found new ways to torment me. My first boyfriend, Jake, broke up with me after hearing a rumor that I'd been cheating on him with his best friend. I was devastated, but when I confronted Sarah about it, she just shrugged. "How could I have started that rumor?" she said innocently. "I don't even know your friends from school." But I saw the glint in her eye, the barely concealed satisfaction at my pain. She was getting better at covering her tracks, at maintaining her facade of innocence. As my high school years progressed, I became more determined than ever to secure my escape. I poured all my energy into a special project that I hoped would be my ticket to a prestigious college far away from Sarah's clutches. But I knew better than to let my guard down, even for a moment. My friend Melissa was the only person I truly trusted. We'd been close since elementary school, and she was well aware of Sarah's true nature. "I need you to keep something for me," I told her one afternoon as we sat in her room. I pulled out a thick folder from my backpack. "This is my project for the university grant competition. If I win, I get a full ride to Westfield College." "Wow, that's amazing," Melissa exclaimed, then her face fell slightly. "But, why are you giving it to me?" I took a deep breath. "Because if Sarah finds out how important this is to me, she'll find a way to destroy it. I need you to keep it safe. I'll work on a dummy version at home." Melissa's eyes widened in understanding. "Clever," she said, taking the folder and locking it in her desk drawer. "Don't worry, I'll guard it with my life." For weeks, I worked on 2 versions of the project, the real one, safely tucked away at Melissa's house, and a decoy version at home. I made sure to leave the decoy version conspicuously on my desk, knowing Sarah wouldn't be able to resist snooping. The day before the submission deadline, it happened. I was in the kitchen when I heard Sarah's sickeningly sweet voice. "Oh no, Amanda, I'm so sorry." I rushed to the living room to find Sarah standing over my desk, a glass of orange juice appended over my decoy project. Papers were soaked, ink running in streaks across the pages. "I was just bringing you a drink," Sarah said, her eyes wide with feigned innocence. I tripped. "It was an accident, I swear." Our parents came running at the commotion. Mom gasped at the sight of the ruined papers. "Oh, Amanda," she sighed. "You should be more careful about where you leave important things." I saw the glint of triumph in Sarah's eyes, the slight upturn of her lips as she waited for my reaction. But this time I was ready. I smiled. The look of confusion on Sarah's face was almost comical. "It's okay," I said calmly. "That was just a backup copy. I already submitted the real project last week." The triumph in Sarah's eyes flickered and died, replaced by a flash of anger so quick I almost missed it. Our parents, oblivious as always, praised me for my foresight. A few weeks later, the results of the competition were announced. I'd won the grant, a full scholarship to Westfield College, 3 states away. As I read the acceptance letter, tears of joy and relief streamed down my face. I was getting out. I was finally escaping. But my moment of triumph was short-lived. As I packed my bags for college, I overheard my parents talking in hushed tones. "It's a shame," Mom was saying. "I wish Sarah had gotten an opportunity like this. She deserves it more." "I know," Dad agreed. "Amanda's smart, but Sarah, she's special. She could really go places with a chance like that." Their words stung, but I was past caring. In a few days, I'd be gone, starting a new life far away from Sarah's manipulations and my parents' blind favoritism. The next few years were like a breath of fresh air. At Westfield College, I thrived. I made genuine friends, excelled in my studies, and even started to heal from the emotional trauma of my childhood. I majored in finance, discovering a talent for numbers and analysis that I never knew I had. Whatever the reason, I graduated at the top of my class and landed a job at a prestigious financial firm in the city. Life was good. I had my own apartment, a job I loved, and a sense of peace I'd never known before. I kept in touch with my parents, visiting them on holidays and occasional weekends, but these visits were always tense. Sarah was still living at home, having chosen to attend a local community college. Every time I saw her, I could feel her resentment simmering just beneath the surface. It was a typical Friday at work when I got the call that would shatter my carefully constructed peace. I was in the middle of analyzing some market trends when my phone buzzed. It was my mother. "Amanda," she said, her voice tight with tension. "We need to talk. It's about your sister. She's graduating soon, and, well, we think it would be best if she came to live with you in the city." I nearly dropped the phone. "What? Mom, no. That's not possible." "Don't be selfish, Amanda," my mother snapped. "Sarah needs this opportunity. And you have that big apartment all to yourself. Plus, we need you to cover her tuition for college." I felt like I was drowning. All the old feelings of helplessness and fear came rushing back. "Mom, I can't. My apartment isn't big enough, and I can't afford." "Can't afford it?" my mother interrupted. "With that fancy job of yours? Don't lie to us, Amanda. We know you're doing well for yourself." I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. "Mom, it's not about the money. Sarah and we don't get along. You know that." "Oh, not this again," my mother sighed. "Amanda, when are you going to let go of this childish jealousy? Your sister needs you. This is what family does." I closed my eyes, feeling a headache coming on. "I'm sorry, Mom. The answer is no. I can't have Sarah living with me, and I won't pay for her tuition. I have my own life, my own expenses." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. When my mother spoke again, her voice was cold. "I see. Well, I hope you're happy with your decision, Amanda. Don't bother coming home for Christmas this year." Later that evening, as I was trying to distract myself with work, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text from Sarah. "You'll regret this," it read. Just 3 words, but they sent a chill down my spine. I tried to shake it off. Sarah was hundreds of miles away. What could she possibly do to me now? Months flew by after that tense phone call with my parents. I threw myself into my work, trying to push thoughts of my family to the back of my mind. My life in the city continued. I excelled at my job, made new friends, and even started dating a bit. Then, on a random Tuesday, my phone rang. It was my mother. "Amanda," she said, her voice uncharacteristically hesitant. "We need you to come home. It's important." Against my better judgment, I took a month's vacation from work and boarded a plane back to my hometown. As I walked up the familiar driveway, a sense of dread washed over me. What could be so important that they needed me home for a whole month? We gathered in the living room, an uneasy silence falling over us. Finally, my mother spoke. "Your great-aunt Mildred called us," she said. "She wants all 4 of us to visit her in Hawaii. She's even booked the plane tickets herself." I blinked in surprise. Aunt Mildred had always been kind to me as a child, but I hadn't seen her in years. "All 4 of us?" I asked, glancing at Sarah. Sarah snorted. "It's ridiculous. Amanda doesn't need to go. She hasn't even talked to Aunt Mildred in years." "Hush," my father said sternly. This was Mildred's condition. All 4 of us, or none of us. An uncomfortable silence fell over the room. I could almost see the gears turning in everyone's heads. Finally, my mother voiced what we were all thinking. Do you think she might be dying? That this is about her will?" The atmosphere in the room shifted. I saw a glimmer of something in Sarah's eyes. Greed? Excitement? It made me uneasy. "We shouldn't jump to conclusions," I said quickly. "Maybe she just wants to see all of us." But even as I said it, I knew it was unlikely. Aunt Mildred had always been a bit of a recluse. For her to suddenly want a family reunion in Hawaii, it had to be something big. As we discussed the logistics of the trip, I found myself getting excited despite my reservations. I had fond memories of Aunt Mildred from my childhood. She had always been kind to me, always had a moment to listen when no one else did. The thought of seeing her again, of spending time in beautiful Hawaii, was appealing. But there was still a nagging worry in the back of my mind. I glanced at Sarah, who had been uncharacteristically quiet since her initial outburst. She caught my eye and smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. It was the same smile she'd given me countless times before pulling some elaborate scheme to get me in trouble. I tried to shake off the feeling. We were adults now. Surely Sarah wouldn't try anything, not with so much potentially at stake. And yet, the day of our departure finally arrived. Despite my lingering unease, I found myself caught up in the excitement of the trip. We arrived at the airport, our family presenting a united front for what felt like the first time in years. As we approached the security checkpoint, I allowed myself to hope that maybe, just maybe, this trip could be a fresh start for all of us. How naive I was. Just as we were about to go through security, a stern-faced officer approached me. "Ma'am, I need you to come with me," he said, his voice leaving no room for argument. Confused and a little scared, I looked at my family. "What's going on?" The officer's face remained impassive. "We received an anonymous tip that you're carrying prohibited items in your luggage. We need to do a thorough check." My heart sank as I turned to look at Sarah. There it was, that familiar gleeful smile, the one that always spelled trouble for me. In that moment, I knew exactly what had happened. "It was her," I said, pointing at Sarah. "She sent that message. She's trying to sabotage me." My parents' faces clouded over with anger, but to my shock, it was directed at me. "Amanda," my mother hissed. "How dare you accuse your sister like that? Again with this nonsense?" I tried to protest, but my father cut me off. "Enough, Amanda. Go with the officer. We'll sort this out." Just then, an announcement echoed through the terminal: final boarding call for Flight 372 to Honolulu. My parents exchanged a look of panic. "That's our flight," my mother said. "Please," I begged, my voice cracking. "Wait for me. I'll sort this out quickly, I promise." But my pleas fell on deaf ears. My father shook his head, not meeting my eyes. "We can't miss this flight, Amanda. You know how important this is." "We'll see you in Hawaii," my mother added, already turning away. I watched in disbelief as my parents walked away, not even glancing back. Only Sarah looked back, her triumphant smile cutting me to the core. Then she too disappeared into the crowd, leaving me alone with the security officer. The next few hours were a blur of invasive searches and endless questions. They went through every item in my luggage, every pocket of my clothing. I had to wait for a female officer to be available for a pat-down. By the time they finally concluded that I wasn't carrying anything illegal, my family's plane was long gone. As I sat in the now quiet airport, I faced a choice. I could book a flight for the next day, join my family in Hawaii, and try to salvage this disaster of a trip. Or I looked at the departure board. There was a flight leaving for my city in an hour. Back to my job, my friends, my life. Away from the drama and pain that seemed to follow my family wherever they went. In that moment, I made my decision. I walked up to the ticket counter and bought a one-way ticket home. As I boarded the plane, I felt a mixture of hurt, anger, and an odd sense of relief. Yes, I was letting Aunt Mildred down, and I felt guilty about that. But for once, I was choosing myself. My peace, my sanity. A few days after returning home, I was settling back into my routine, trying to push the airport incident out of my mind. I was just beginning to relax when my phone rang. It was my mother. "Amanda," her voice trembled, thick with emotion. My heart raced, sensing something was terribly wrong. "Your sister, Sarah's been arrested." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. "Arrested? What for?" My mother's story came out in a rush of words, each one more shocking than the last. They had arrived at Aunt Mildred's house in Hawaii, only to find her furious that I wasn't there. She refused to discuss her will without all four of us present, Mom explained. We had to stay at her house while we tried to figure out what to do. I felt a pang of guilt, quickly overshadowed by my mother's next words. Then it happened. Your aunt, she almost fell down the stairs. She could have broken her neck, Amanda. What? Is she okay? I asked, concerned for the aunt I remembered so fondly. She's fine, thank goodness. But Amanda, it wasn't an accident. It was Sarah. She pushed her. I felt the blood drain from my face. How do you know? There were cameras. Hidden all over the house. They caught everything. The pieces started falling into place. The anonymous tip at the airport, Sarah's triumphant smile, it had all been part of her plan. A plan that had backfired spectacularly. Aunt Mildred called the police, my mother continued, her voice breaking. When they came to arrest Sarah, she lost it. Started screaming about how she just wanted the money, how she'd been waiting for years for this opportunity. I listened in stunned silence as my mother recounted Sarah's meltdown. How she'd screamed that she hated our parents, that she was just waiting for them to die so she could inherit everything. We were blind, Amanda, my mother sobbed. How could we not have seen it? How could we have been so wrong about her? As I listened to my mother's broken words, a whirlwind of emotions swept through me. Shock at Sarah's actions. Vindication that her true nature had finally been revealed. Sadness for my parents, whose world had just been shattered. And buried beneath it all, a tiny, shameful spark of satisfaction that they finally understood what I'd been trying to tell them for years. As we ended the call, I sat in silence, trying to wrap my head around everything that had happened. The sister I'd grown up with, who I'd always known was manipulative, had crossed a line I never thought possible. She'd tried to seriously harm our great-aunt, all for the chance at an inheritance. When I arrived at my childhood home, the atmosphere was completely different from my last visit. Gone was the tension and unspoken resentment. Instead, I found my parents looking older, more vulnerable, but also more open than I'd ever seen them. Amanda, my mother said, her voice thick with emotion as she embraced me. We're so sorry. We've been blind for so long. My father, a man never comfortable with emotional displays, simply placed a hand on my shoulder. We should have listened to you, he said gruffly. Can you forgive us? It was a moment I'd dreamed of for years, but now that it was here, I found myself overwhelmed. Of course, I managed to say, tears welling up in my eyes. Of course I forgive you. We spent hours talking, really talking, for what felt like the first time in years. They shared their shock at Sarah's actions, their guilt over dismissing my concerns for so long, and their fear for the future. I listened, offering support and finally feeling heard. But our fragile peace was soon shattered. We received word that Aunt Mildred had withdrawn her statement to the police, and Sarah was being released. The news hit us like a physical blow. She can't come back here, my father said, his voice firm. We can't trust her anymore. What followed was a painful but necessary process. My parents, with my support, filed for Sarah's eviction. They presented the court with evidence of her threats in Hawaii, her actions towards Aunt Mildred, along with a history of manipulative behavior. The court ruled in our favor. Sarah was to be evicted from the family home. When she came, my parents didn't even let her in the house. They left her belongings on the porch, a final, symbolic separation. Sarah's response was predictably spiteful. As she drove away, presumably out of our lives for good, she left one last parting shot, a string of vicious curses spray-painted on the side of the house. It was childish, petty, and so typically Sarah that it almost made me laugh. Almost. Then, out of the blue, I received a call from Aunt Mildred. Amanda, dear, she said, her voice warm, despite everything that had happened. I think it's time you came to visit me in Hawaii. Just you this time. I was hesitant at first, but something in her voice convinced me. A week later, I found myself on a plane to Hawaii, unsure of what to expect. Aunt Mildred's house was beautiful, perched on a cliff overlooking the ocean. She greeted me with a warm hug, looking far more spry than I'd imagined given recent events. I'm so glad you're here, she said, leading me into her study. There's something I need to show you. She pulled out a document, her will. As I scanned the pages, my eyes widened in shock. Aunt Mildred had left everything, her house, her investments, everything, to me. But, why? I stammered, looking up at her in disbelief. Aunt Mildred smiled, a twinkle in her eye. Because, my dear, you're the only one who never came here looking for a handout. You're the only one who saw me as family, not as a potential windfall. More than the inheritance itself, what touched me was the recognition. After years of being overlooked and dismissed, someone had seen my true worth. As I hugged Aunt Mildred, tears in my eyes, I felt like I was finally, truly coming home. My name's Amelia, and I'm 29 years old. For the past 5 years, I've been making a living as an event planner. Weddings, birthdays, anniversaries, you name it, I've organized it. It's not what I thought I'd be doing when I was younger, but life has a funny way of surprising you. I studied economics in college, but that's not where my passion lay. During my time there, I found myself drawn to organizing educational and entertainment events on campus. It started small, a study group here, a movie night there. But before I knew it, I was the go-to person for any event that needed planning. After graduation, I knew I couldn't see myself crunching numbers in an office. So, I took a leap of faith and started my own event planning business. It wasn't easy at first. I had to build my reputation from scratch, taking on any job I could get. No event is too small, I'd tell potential clients with a smile, even as I worried about making rent that month. But slowly, surely, word spread. One satisfied client led to another, and before I knew it, I had more work than I could handle. 5 years flew by, and here I am, with a thriving business and a reputation I'm proud of. Today, I'm sitting across from Mr. Johnson, a successful businessman who's turning 50 next month. He wants a party to remember, and I'm determined to give him just that. So, Mr. Johnson, I say, pulling out my notebook, what did you have in mind for your big day? He leans back in his chair, a thoughtful look on his face. Well, I was thinking something classy. Maybe a black tie affair at the Grand Hotel? I nod, jotting down notes. That's a great venue. We could do a classic Hollywood theme. Red carpet entrance, paparazzi-style photographers. As I'm mid-sentence, my phone buzzes. I glance at it, ready to ignore the call, but the name on the screen makes me pause. It's my sister, Sarah. Now, I should probably explain about my family. It's complicated. I have a younger sister, Sarah, who's 7 years my junior. She's always been the apple of our parents' eye. Don't get me wrong, my parents took care of me too, but there was always a difference in how they treated us. When I went to college, they couldn't find the money to help me out. It was my grandmother who stepped in, bless her soul. But a few years later, when Sarah went to college, suddenly, my parents had no problem paying for her tuition and a rented apartment. It stung, I won't lie. Over the years, I've learned to accept it, but it's left a mark. I don't talk to my family much these days. So, seeing Sarah's name on my phone is a surprise. I'm sorry, Mr. Johnson, I say, standing up. Would you excuse me for a moment? It's my sister, and she rarely calls. He waves me off with a kind smile. Of course, take your time. I step out of the room and answer the phone. Sarah, is everything okay? Amelia. Her voice is bright, excited. You need to come over to Mom and Dad's right away. We have big news. I sigh, knowing I'll regret this. Alright, I'll be there as soon as I can. I hang up and return to Mr. Johnson, apologizing profusely. I'm so sorry, but I have a family emergency. Can we reschedule for tomorrow? He's understanding, thankfully. I drove to my parents' house, with a knot in my stomach. It had been months since I'd last been there, and I wasn't exactly looking forward to this impromptu family gathering. I rang the doorbell, and my mother answered, a forced smile on her face. Amelia, dear, come in. The living room was crowded. My father sat in his usual armchair. Sarah was perched on the couch, practically vibrating with excitement. Next to her was a man I didn't recognize, about my age, with a polite smile. "Amelia." Sarah jumped up, grabbing the man's hand and pulling him forward. "This is Mark, my fiancé." I blinked, surprised. "Fiancé? Wow, congratulations." Mark seemed nice enough, but I couldn't help wondering how long they'd been together. Sarah had never mentioned him before. "So," I said, turning to Sarah, "is this why you called me over? To meet Mark?" Sarah's smile widened. "Well, partly. But there's more." She clasped her hands together, practically bouncing. "We're having an engagement party soon, and I want you to plan it." I felt a sinking feeling in my stomach. "Oh, Sarah, I don't know. I'm pretty booked up right now." "Nonsense," my father interrupted, his voice gruff. "This is your sister we're talking about. Family comes first." I bit back a retort about how family hadn't come first when I needed help with college. Instead, I forced a smile. "It's not that simple, Dad. I have commitments to other clients." "But you're the best at this stuff," Sarah insisted. "And I want the most amazing engagement party ever. Of course it'll be free. You wouldn't charge your own sister, would you?" I looked around the room, seeing expectant faces. Even Mark looked like he assumed I'd do this for nothing. I felt cornered. "Okay," I said finally, my voice tight. "I'll organize it for free. But you'll need to cover all the other expenses: venue, catering, decorations, music, everything else." Sarah squealed and hugged me. "You're the best, Amelia. We'll pay for everything else, promise." As I left the house an hour later, after listening to Sarah's grand ideas for her perfect engagement party, I felt a mixture of regret and resignation. I'd have to call Mr. Johnson and cancel our rescheduled meeting. There went a lucrative contract. Back home, I picked up my phone and dialed Mr. Johnson's number. "Mr. Johnson? It's Amelia. I'm so sorry, but I won't be able to take on your birthday party after all. A family obligation has come up. My friend Lisa is also an event planner. She's excellent. I can give you her contact information if you'd like." After passing along Lisa's details and apologizing once more, I hung up. I stared at my phone, a sense of unease growing in my stomach. I'd just turned down a major client for a job I wasn't even getting paid for. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of planning and preparations. I secured a beautiful restaurant for the date Sarah wanted. It wasn't easy, the place was popular and usually booked months in advance. But Tony, the owner of the restaurant, couldn't resist my pressure. I also worked with the chef to create a spread that would impress even the most discerning guests. Then came the decorations, the music, the invitations, every detail had to be perfect. I called my go-to DJ, Mike, to book him for the event. He agreed, albeit reluctantly. I had similar conversations with all my usual contractors, the florist, the cake baker, the photographer. They all trusted me enough to agree to delayed payment, but I could sense their unease. As the days passed, I found myself turning down other jobs to focus on Sarah's party. It was eating into my income, but I told myself it would be worth it to see my sister happy. Finally, with everything arranged, I sat down to create the invoice. I carefully itemized every expense, from the venue rental to the last flower in the centerpieces. The total was substantial. I took a deep breath and emailed the invoice to Sarah. "There," I muttered to myself. "All done." That evening, my phone rang. It was Sarah. "Hey sis," I answered. "Did you get the invoice?" There was a moment of silence, then Sarah's voice came through, sickly sweet. "Amelia, darling, there must be some mistake. Why are you sending me a bill?" I frowned, confused. "What do you mean?" "It's the invoice for all the expenses for your engagement party. Remember, you said you'd cover everything except my fee?" Sarah laughed, a sound that sent chills down my spine. "Oh, Amelia. I thought you understood. You're supposed to pay for all of this. You make so much money with your business." I was speechless. My mind raced, thinking of all the vendors waiting to be paid, all the promises I'd made based on Sarah's word. "Sarah, listen to me," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I organized this for free, which is already a huge favor. I can't pay for everything else too. You promised." But Sarah had already hung up. I tried calling my parents, hoping they could talk some sense into Sarah. But to my horror, they took her side. They insisted I should pay, that it was my duty as the successful daughter. I hung up, my hands shaking with anger and disbelief. How could they do this to me? How could they expect me to bankrupt myself for a party? As I sat there, trying to figure out what to do, a notification popped up on my phone. It was a post from Sarah on social media. Curious, I clicked on it. "Can't wait for tomorrow's engagement party," the post read. "So excited to celebrate with everyone. We've spent so much to make it perfect." In that moment, something snapped inside me. If Sarah wanted to play games, well, two could play at that. My fingers trembled as I dialed the restaurant's number. It was late, but I knew Tony would still be there, closing up after the night's service. "Tony? It's Amelia. I'm so sorry, but I need to cancel tomorrow's event. I'll pay you a cancellation fee. And I'll make this up to you, I swear." Tony sighed. "All right, Amelia. I trust you. But this isn't like you." One by one, I called all the vendors. The florist, the DJ, the cake baker, everyone. Each call was painful, each explanation more humiliating than the last. By the time I finished, my savings account was significantly lighter, but at least my professional relationships were intact. I'd paid everyone their fees and cancellation charges out of my own pocket. I barely slept that night. When morning came, I made myself a strong cup of coffee and settled in front of my computer. I knew Sarah would be live streaming her arrival at the restaurant. I wanted to see this. Right on schedule, Sarah's beaming face appeared on my screen. She was outside the restaurant, surrounded by a group of excited-looking friends and family members. "We're here," Sarah chirped into her phone camera. "I can't wait to show you guys everything. It's going to be amazing." I watched as she confidently strode up to the restaurant doors, her fiancé Mark in tow. She reached for the handle, still chattering away to her viewers. "And here we, oh." The smile froze on Sarah's face as she tugged at the door. It didn't budge. "That's weird," she laughed nervously, trying again. "It must be stuck." But it wasn't stuck. Sarah's eyes widened as she finally noticed the sign on the door. "Event cancelled," it read in bold letters. The live stream erupted in confused comments. Sarah's face paled as she turned to Mark, who looked equally bewildered. I couldn't help but feel a twinge of satisfaction as I watched the chaos unfold. It was petty, I knew, but after years of being the family doormat, it felt good to finally stand up for myself. My phone started buzzing almost immediately. Sarah's name flashed on the screen. I took a deep breath and answered. "Hello, Sarah." "Amelia," she screeched. "What the hell is going on? The restaurant is closed. Everything's ruined." I kept my voice calm. "Well, Sarah, since you refused to pay for the event you asked me to organize, I had to cancel it. I couldn't let my contractors go unpaid." But what about the food?" Mark's voice came through faintly in the background. "Where's all the food we were supposed to have?" I couldn't help but smile a little. "Oh, the food? I donated it to a homeless shelter. At least someone will enjoy it." More screaming followed, but I'd had enough. I hung up the phone. About 10 minutes later, my phone rang again. My mother's voice came through, shrill and angry. "Amelia, how could you do this to your sister? We raised you better than this." I felt a surge of frustration. "Mom, did Sarah tell you what she tried to do? She wanted me to pay for everything." "So what? my father's voice boomed in the background. "You're doing well for yourself. You could have helped your sister out." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Dad, we're talking about thousands of dollars here." "I'm not made of money." "You're just being selfish," my mother snapped. "Your poor sister is heartbroken. Her special day is ruined because of your greed." I tried to stay calm, but their words were cutting deep. "Greed? I organized everything for free. I even paid cancellation fees out of my own pocket." But they weren't listening. My mother's next words felt like a slap in the face. "You know what I think?" she said, her voice cold. "I think you did this because you're jealous. You're almost 30, Amelia. No husband, no children. You couldn't stand to see her getting married while you have no one." I hung up the phone, my hands shaking. Tears stung my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. How dare they? How dare they twist this around and make me the villain? As I sat there, trying to process everything that had happened, an idea struck me. If Sarah and Mark had promised to pay for everything, where did that money go? They must have had it, right? I opened my laptop and drafted an email. In it, I detailed all the expenses I had incurred, including the cancellation fees. I demanded that Sarah and Mark reimburse me for every penny. "If you don't pay," I wrote, my fingers flying over the keyboard, "I'll be forced to take legal action." I hit send before I could second-guess myself. It was a bold move, I knew, but I was done being the family pushover. Within minutes, my phone was buzzing again. This time, it was a barrage of text messages from Sarah and Mark. I steeled myself and opened them. The messages were a mix of threats and insults. Sarah called me every name in the book, while Mark threatened to ruin me if I tried to take them to court. I saved screenshots of every message. If this did end up in court, I wanted all the evidence I could get. I also needed advice from someone who might have some insight into Sarah's fiancé and his family. That's when I remembered my Aunt Linda. She always seemed to know all the town gossip. Maybe she could tell me something about Mark and his family. I dialed her number, hoping she'd be willing to talk. "Aunt Linda? It's Amelia. I need to ask you something about Sarah's fiancé." Aunt Linda's voice crackled through the phone, warm and familiar. "Amelia, dear. It's been ages. What do you want to know about Mark?" I took a deep breath. "Well, I was wondering if you knew anything about his family, their financial situation." "Oh, honey," Aunt Linda chuckled. "You're asking the right person. The Thompsons, that's Mark's family, they're quite well off. They own a chain of laundromats across the city, and word is they've got their fingers in some lucrative real estate deals too." I felt my jaw drop. "Wait, what? They're wealthy?" "Oh yes, very much so," Aunt Linda continued, oblivious to my shock. "Why, I heard they gave Mark a hefty sum to arrange that engagement party. $30,000, if the rumors are true." My mind was reeling. $30,000? And they had tried to make me pay for everything? After hanging up, I sat in stunned silence for a few minutes. Then, determination set in. I knew what I had to do next. It took some digging, but I managed to find the address of Mark's parents. Without giving myself time to second-guess my decision, I got in my car and drove there. The house was impressive, a large, well-maintained property in one of the nicest neighborhoods in town. I took a deep breath and rang the doorbell. A middle-aged woman answered, her eyebrows raised in curiosity. "Can I help you, Mrs. Thompson?" I asked. When she nodded, I continued, "I'm Amelia, Sarah's sister. I need to talk to you and your husband about Mark and the engagement party." She looked surprised, but invited me in. Soon, I was sitting in their living room, facing both of Mark's parents. "Mr. and Mrs. Thompson," I began, my voice steadier than I felt, "I'm here because I think you should know what happened with the engagement party." Over the next half hour, I explained everything. How Sarah had asked me to organize the party for free. How they had promised to pay for everything else, but then refused. How I had been forced to cancel everything and pay the cancellation fees myself. As I spoke, I saw the shock and dismay growing on their faces. When I finished, there was a long silence. Finally, Mr. Thompson spoke, his voice tight with anger. "We gave Mark $30,000 for this party. He told us everything was paid for." I felt a wave of relief wash over me. They believed me. Mr. Thompson left the room and returned a few minutes later with his checkbook. He wrote out a check for the full amount I had spent, plus a little extra for my trouble. "It's the least we can do," he said, handing it to me. "And don't worry, we'll be having a very serious conversation with Mark and Sarah about their behavior." As I left their house, I felt a mix of emotions, relief, vindication, but also sadness. This whole ordeal had exposed some ugly truths about my sister and her fiancé. On the drive home, my phone buzzed with texts. It was Sarah and Mark again, but this time their tone was very different. Gone were the threats and insults, replaced by panicked apologies and pleas for forgiveness. In the weeks that followed, I heard through the grapevine about the fallout from my visit to the Thompsons. Aunt Linda kept me updated. "You won't believe this, Amelia," she said during one of our phone calls. "Mark's parents have cut him off completely. No more monthly allowance, no financial support for the wedding, nothing." I couldn't help but feel a twinge of satisfaction. "Really? That's quite drastic." Aunt Linda's voice lowered conspiratorially. "Oh, honey, they were furious. Apparently, they don't take kindly to being lied to and having their money misused. Can't say I blame them." I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. "What about the wedding? Is it still happening?" There was a pause, then Aunt Linda chuckled. "Well, that's the kicker. Without Mommy and Daddy's money, Mark and Sarah can't afford the lavish wedding they were planning. Last I heard, they'd postponed it indefinitely." My parents, predictably, didn't see it that way. They blamed me for Sarah's misfortune, conveniently forgetting that it was her own actions that had led to this situation. "You've ruined your sister's life," my mother said during one particularly heated phone call. "Are you happy now?" I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "Mom, Sarah, and Mark tried to scam me out of thousands of dollars. They lied to everyone, including Mark's parents. How is that my fault?" But it was like talking to a brick wall. In their eyes, Sarah could do no wrong, and I was the villain who had destroyed her happiness. Despite the family drama, my life went on. I threw myself back into my work, rebuilding the client base I had neglected during the engagement party fiasco. Slowly but surely, things started to look up. One day, as I was leaving a meeting with a new client, I ran into Mr. Johnson, the man whose 50th birthday party I had canceled to work on Sarah's engagement. "Amelia," he called out, a smile on his face. "How have you been?" I felt a pang of guilt. "Mr. Johnson, I'm so sorry about canceling on you like that. It was unprofessional of me." He waved off my apology. "No need for that. Your friend Lisa did a wonderful job with the party. But I have to say, I missed your personal touch." An idea struck me. "Well, if you're planning any events in the future, I'd love the opportunity to make it up to you." Mr. Johnson's eyes twinkled. "As a matter of fact, my company's 25th anniversary is coming up. How would you like to handle that?" As I walked away, contract in hand, I couldn't help but feel that things were finally looking up. Yes, my relationship with my family was strained, but my business was thriving, and I had my self-respect intact. One evening, as I was poring over seating arrangements, a loud knock at my apartment door startled me. I wasn't expecting anyone. Cautiously, I approached the door and looked through the peephole. To my shock, I saw Sarah and Mark standing there. Against my better judgment, I opened the door. "What are you doing here?" Sarah brazenly pushed past me into the apartment, Mark trailing behind her. "We're moving in," she announced. I blinked, sure I'd misheard. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," Sarah said, her tone accusatory. "Because of you, Mark's parents cut us off." No money for the wedding, no allowance, nothing. So, we decided we're going to live here. I couldn't help it, I laughed. The sheer audacity of their plan was almost impressive. You can't be serious. This is my home. You can't just decide to move in. Mark stepped forward, his face twisted in anger. You owe us, Amelia. You ruined everything. I felt my patience snap. I owe you nothing. You tried to scam me, remember? Now get out of my apartment. As I shut the door behind them, I heard Sarah's parting shot, "You'll be sorry." A few days later, I returned home from a meeting to find my apartment door surrounded by a strange, foamy substance. It took me a moment to realize what I was seeing: construction foam, hardened around the entire perimeter of my door. Furious, I called a locksmith service to remove the foam and replace my locks. As I waited, my neighbor, Mrs. Chen, approached me. "Amelia, dear," she said, concern etched on her face. I saw what happened. I have it on video if you need it. Sure enough, Mrs. Chen's security camera had captured Sarah and Mark in the act of vandalizing my door. The footage was clear as day. Armed with this evidence, I went straight to the police station. I filed a report for property damage and requested a restraining order against both Sarah and Mark. The legal process was draining, but ultimately satisfying. The court fined Sarah and Mark for the damage to my apartment and ordered them to cover the costs of repairs. More importantly, they were banned from coming within 500 feet of me for the next 2 years. When my parents found out, they were livid, not at Sarah, of course, but at me. They couldn't believe I'd taken legal action against my own sister. "How could you do this to your family?" my mother wailed over the phone. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. "No, Mom. The question is, how could you support Sarah after everything she's done? I'm done being the family scapegoat." With that, I hung up the phone and blocked their numbers. It hurt, cutting ties with my family, but I knew it was necessary for my own well-being. In the weeks that followed, I threw myself into work. Mr. Johnson's anniversary party was a resounding success, earning me glowing reviews and a slew of new clients. As I stood at the back of the beautifully decorated hall, watching the guests enjoy themselves, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. Yes, I'd lost my family, but I'd gained something far more valuable: self-respect and the knowledge that I could stand on my own 2 feet. My name's Isabella, and I'm 21 years old. I just finished my 3rd year at art college, and let me tell you, it's been one hell of a ride. But before I get into all that, you need to know where I come from. I grew up in a house where I never felt at home. My parents, Tom and Sarah, always made it clear that my older sister, Emily, was their golden child. She's 4 years older than me and has always been a thorn in my side. From the day I was born, Emily seemed to hate me. She'd tease me, break my toys, and make my life miserable. And my parents? They'd just laugh it off, saying, "Oh, that's just how sisters are." But it wasn't normal. I remember when I was 14, I had this huge crush on a boy at school. His name was Jake, and I thought he was the cutest thing ever. I'd spend hours drawing portraits of him in secret, hiding them under my mattress where I thought no one would find them. But Emily found them. And you know what she did? She pinned them up on the school bulletin board for everyone to see. I still remember walking into school that day. The laughter, the pointing, the whispers. It felt like the whole world was crashing down around me. And Jake? He came up to me, all awkward and stuttering. Isabella. I saw the drawings. Look, you're nice and all, but I don't like you that way. I ran home crying that day. My parents were in the kitchen when I burst through the door, tears streaming down my face. "Mom, Dad, Emily humiliated me at school. She found my private drawings in." But before I could finish, Emily waltzed in, a smug grin on her face. "Oh, come on, Izzy," she said, using the nickname I hated. "It was just a bit of fun. Not my fault you can't take a joke." And you know what my parents did? They laughed. They actually laughed. "Sweetie," my mom said, wiping tears of mirth from her eyes. "You really need to toughen up. It's not Emily's fault you're such a crybaby." That's why, when I got accepted into art college, I was over the moon. It was my ticket out of that house, away from the constant mockery and belittlement. My grandmother was the only one who ever showed me any real love. She was the one who encouraged my art, who told me I had talent. When I got accepted, she insisted on paying for my tuition. "Isabella," she said, her eyes twinkling, "you've got a gift. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. I'll make sure you get the education you deserve." For 3 years, she paid for everything. My tuition, my supplies, even some extra for living expenses. But then, just before my final year, she got sick. I remember sitting by her bedside, holding her frail hand. She looked at me with those kind eyes of hers and said, "Isabella, my dear, I'm so proud of you. You're going to do great things." Then she turned to my parents, who were standing at the foot of the bed. "Tom, Sarah, I need you to promise me something. Promise me you'll pay for Isabella's final year. She needs to finish her education." My parents nodded solemnly. "Of course, Mom," my dad said. "We promise." Grandma died a week later. At the reading of her will, we found out she'd left her house to my parents and her jewelry to Emily and me. Emily, of course, immediately grabbed the diamond tiara. "I'll take this," she announced. "Isabella can have the ring. She doesn't care about jewelry anyway, right, Izzy?" I didn't argue. She was right, I didn't care much for jewelry. So I took the diamond ring and put it in a safety deposit box at the bank. I made friends quickly in college. There was Zoe, a punk rocker with a talent for abstract art, and Marcus, a quiet guy who could make sculptures that took your breath away. They didn't care about my family drama. To them, I was just Isabella, the girl who could paint like nobody's business. "Hey, Bella," Zoe said one day, using the nickname I actually liked. "There's a tattoo parlor downtown looking for someone to draw designs. You should apply." I was hesitant at first. My parents would flip if they knew I was working in a tattoo parlor. But then I thought, why should I care what they think? So I applied, and to my surprise, I got the job. The owner, a burly guy named Mike with more ink than skin, took one look at my portfolio and said, "You're hired, kid." For the first time in my life, I was earning my own money. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I didn't tell my parents or Emily about it. I could already hear Emily's mocking voice, "Oh, little Izzy's drawing pictures for thugs now? How cute." College life suited me. I threw myself into my studies, determined to make my grandmother proud. My professors praised my work, and I even won a few small competitions. But more importantly, I was happy. The years flew by, and before I knew it, I was finishing up my 3rd year. As the summer break approached, a familiar dread settled in my stomach. I had to go home. I opened the door and stepped into chaos. The living room was full of people, all bustling about with excitement. In the center of it all stood Emily, beaming as she held up a white dress. My mother noticed me first. "Oh, Isabella," she said, her smile faltering slightly. "You're home. We weren't expecting you so soon." I stood there, stunned. "Emily's getting married? When did this happen?" Emily turned to me, her smile turning into a smirk. "Oh, didn't anyone tell you? I guess we've all been so busy with the preparations, it must have slipped our minds." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. My own sister was getting married, and no one had even bothered to tell me. "Who's the lucky guy?" I managed to ask, trying to keep my voice steady. "This is Richard," Emily said, pulling forward a tall, handsome man I hadn't noticed before. "Isn't he dreamy?" Richard gave me a polite smile and extended his hand. "Nice to meet you, Isabella. I've heard so much about you." I shook his hand, wondering what exactly he'd heard. Knowing Emily, probably nothing good. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of excited chatter downstairs. Emily was holding court at the breakfast table, surrounded by our parents and a couple of her bridesmaids. As I listened to their conversation, I learned that Emily had broken up with her previous boyfriend at our parents' insistence. Apparently, he'd been mixed up with some dangerous crowd. "Thank God you listened to us, sweetie," Mom said, patting Emily's hand. "Richard is such a better match for you. And his family is so well off." I couldn't help but roll my eyes. Of course, that's what they cared about. "Speaking of Richard," Emily said, turning to me with a smirk, "he's taking me out to dinner tonight." "Not that you'd know anything about that, right, Izzy? Still haven't found a boyfriend?" They all laughed, and I gripped my coffee mug tighter, willing myself not to cry. Some things never change. As the days passed, I tried to stay out of everyone's way. I spent most of my time in my room, sketching and counting down the days until I could leave. But one evening, I couldn't avoid the family dinner. We were all seated around the table when Emily dropped her bombshell. "I've decided to wear Grandma's tiara for the wedding," she announced. "It'll look perfect with my dress." "Oh, that's a wonderful idea," Mom exclaimed. Emily wasn't done. "But you know what would make it even better? If I had a matching piece to go with it. Like, oh, I don't know, a ring?" I froze, my fork halfway to my mouth. I knew exactly where this was going. Mom's eyes lit up. "Oh, that's right. Isabella, didn't Grandma leave you a ring?" I nodded slowly, a sick feeling growing in my stomach. "Well, there you go," Emily said, clapping her hands together. "Izzy, you'll let me borrow the ring for the wedding, won't you?" I put down my fork. "Borrow? For how long?" Emily laughed, a sound that sent chills down my spine. "Oh, silly Izzy. I mean, you'll give it to me. For keeps." But Grandma left that to me," I protested weakly. "Come on, Isabella," Dad said, his voice stern. "Don't be selfish. It's your sister's wedding day." I looked around the table, hoping to see someone, anyone, on my side. But all I saw were expectant faces, waiting for me to give in. Like always. "Isabella," Dad said, his voice cold. "Either you give the ring to your sister, or we won't pay for your final year of college." The room fell silent. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. But you promised Grandma," I whispered, tears welling up in my eyes. Emily let out a harsh laugh. "Oh, please. No one cares about promises made to some half-witted old woman." I stood up so fast, my chair fell over. "How dare you talk about Grandma like that?" I shouted. "That's enough," Dad roared. "Isabella, you have a choice to make. The ring or your education. Decide." I looked at their faces, Dad's anger, Mom's disappointment, Emily's smug satisfaction. In that moment, I knew I had lost. Again. With shaking hands, I took off the necklace where I kept the key to my safety deposit box. I handed it to Emily. The morning after the ring incident, I cornered Emily in the kitchen. "When exactly is your wedding?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Emily looked up from her coffee, a sly smile playing on her lips. "It's on the 29th. "Why, planning to ruin it?" I ignored her jab. 2 weeks. I had 2 weeks to get away from this toxic environment. "No," I replied coolly. "I'm going to visit a friend from college. I'll be back in time for the wedding." I packed my bags and left that afternoon, heading to my friend Zoe's place in the next city over. For the first time in days, I felt like I could breathe. Zoe and I spent the week exploring art galleries, hitting up local cafes, and just enjoying each other's company. It was exactly what I needed. But my moment of peace was shattered exactly 1 week later. I was scrolling through my social media feed when I saw it, photos of Emily's wedding. My sister, resplendent in white, the diamond tiara glittering on her head, and my ring sparkling on her finger. The caption read, "Just married. Off to the Maldives with my hunky husband." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. With shaking hands, I dialed Mom's number. "Why didn't you invite me to the wedding?" "Emily told me the wrong date." There was a long pause. Then Dad's voice came on the line. "Isabella, your sister, she didn't want you there. She said you'd ruin her perfect day. We thought it was best not to tell you." I felt like I was going to be sick. "How could you do this to me? I'm your daughter too." "Don't be dramatic," Mom chimed in. "It's not like you really wanted to be there anyway, right?" I hung up, my whole body shaking with anger and hurt. A few days later, I returned home, only to find Emily had also returned from her honeymoon. I walked into the living room to find her, Mom, and Dad huddled together, looking at apartment listings. I cleared my throat, and they all looked up. "Don't forget about my tuition," I said, my voice small. "You promised to pay for my last year if I gave Emily the ring." Dad shifted uncomfortably. "Actually, Isabella, we've decided to use that money as a down payment on Emily's apartment instead." I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. But you promised. You swore to Grandma." "Plans change," Mom said dismissively. "Emily needs it more. I'm sure you can figure something out." Emily was still laughing, a cruel, mocking sound that made my blood boil. Before I knew what I was doing, I lunged at her, grabbing a fistful of her hair. Emily screeched, and suddenly everyone was shouting. Dad yanked me away, his face red with anger. "That's enough," he roared. "Isabella, get out of this house right now." I ran to my room, threw some clothes in a bag, and stormed out, slamming the front door behind me. As I walked away from the house, my heart pounding and my cheeks wet with tears, I realized something. I found myself back at Zoe's place, feeling lost and broken. For days, I barely left her guest room, alternating between crying and staring blankly at the walls. Zoe tried her best to comfort me, but I was inconsolable. A week passed in this haze of despair. Then, one morning, as I listlessly checked my emails, I saw a message that made my heart stop. "Congratulations! You are the winner of the annual art school competition. Your prize includes a full scholarship for your final year of studies." I read the email 3 times, not believing my eyes. Then I let out a scream that brought Zoe running. I thrust my phone at her, happy tears streaming down my face. "I won. I won a scholarship. I can finish school." Zoe's eyes widened as she read the email, then she pulled me into a bone-crushing hug. "Oh my God, Bella! This is amazing." For the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope. I could finish my degree without my parents' help. I could make my own way. When the new semester started, I threw myself into my studies with renewed vigor. Between my classes and my part-time job at the tattoo parlor, I barely had time to think about my family drama. Months passed, and I slowly started to heal. One day, I was hanging out with my classmate, Jake, who worked part-time at a local pawn shop. We were chatting about our day when he mentioned something that caught my attention. "You won't believe what happened during my shift today," he said. "This girl came in with the most beautiful diamond necklace and ring I've ever seen. Must have been worth a fortune." My heart skipped a beat. "What did she look like?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. Jake described a woman who sounded exactly like Emily. "Can you draw the jewelry for me?" I asked, my hands shaking slightly. Jake looked confused, but complied. As I watched him sketch, my suspicions were confirmed. The necklace was the one Emily had always bragged about, and the ring, it was my grandmother's ring. "Jake," I said, my mouth dry, "is there any way you could get me the security footage from the pawn shop?" Jake must have seen the desperation in my eyes because he finally nodded. "Okay, I'll see what I can do." A few days later, Jake handed me a USB drive. "Here," he said. "But you didn't get this from me, okay?" I nodded gratefully and rushed back to my dorm room. With trembling hands, I plugged in the drive and opened the video file. There was Emily, clear as day, handing over the jewelry. But what made my jaw drop was what happened next. As she turned to leave, a man entered the frame. Emily threw her arms around him, kissing him passionately. It wasn't Richard. I leaned closer to the screen, my heart pounding. As the man turned slightly, I gasped. I recognized him. It was Emily's ex-boyfriend, the one our parents had made her break up with because of his criminal connections. I sat back, my mind reeling. Emily had pawned her precious jewelry, including my grandmother's ring, and was apparently cheating on her husband with her criminal ex-boyfriend. Part of me wanted to immediately send this video to my parents, to Richard, to everyone who had ever believed Emily's lies. But another part of me hesitated. This was big. Too big to act on impulsively. Months passed, and I thought I'd put my family drama behind me. Then, out of the blue, my phone rang. It was my Aunt Lisa, my mom's sister. "Isabella, darling, I have wonderful news," she chirped, her voice bubbling with excitement. "Your sister is pregnant. Can you believe it? They're having a big announcement party next week. Isn't it exciting?" My heart sank. Of course, another family event I hadn't been invited to. "That's great, Aunt Lisa. Thanks for letting me know." After hanging up, I sat on my bed, conflicted. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to continue cutting ties with my toxic family. But another part of me, the part that still held on to the video from the pawn shop, knew this might be my chance. A week later, I found myself standing outside my parents' house. Cars lined the street, and I could hear laughter and chatter from inside. Taking a deep breath, I walked up to the front door and rang the bell. Mom opened the door, her smile instantly fading when she saw me. "Isabella, what are you doing here?" Pushing past her, I walked into the living room. The chatter died down as people noticed me. Emily, standing in the center of the room with Richard, looked like she'd seen a ghost. "What is she doing here?" Emily hissed. Dad's voice boomed through the room. "Isabella, get out of this house immediately. You're not welcome here." Confused murmurs rippled through the guests. I saw Richard's parents exchange worried glances. Mom, always one for saving face, plastered on a fake smile. "I'm so sorry, everyone. We've had to distance ourselves from Isabella. She's become quite greedy and unworthy of our family name." The room erupted into arguments. Some relatives defended me, while others sided with my parents. I raised my voice. "I have something to say." Gradually, the room quieted down. All eyes were on me. I turned to Emily. "Congratulations on your pregnancy, sis. But I have to ask, why aren't you wearing Grandma's tiara and ring?" Emily's face went pale. Her mother-in-law spoke up. "Now that you mention it, I haven't seen that beautiful ring in a while." "Emily, dear, where is it?" Emily stuttered. I sent them for restoration. They needed cleaning." I nodded slowly, pulling out my phone. "That's interesting. Because I have a video here that tells a different story." The color drained from Emily's face as I connected my phone to the TV. The security footage from the pawnshop began to play. There was Emily, clear as day, pawning the jewelry. And then, the moment that made everyone in the room gasp, Emily, throwing herself into the arms of a man who was definitely not Richard, kissing him passionately. The moment the video ended, chaos erupted in the living room. Richard's face contorted with rage and pain as he turned to Emily. "Emily, what is this? Who is that man?" he shouted, his voice cracking. Emily burst into tears, mascara streaming down her face. I can explain." Richard's mother stepped forward, her voice ice cold. "I think we all deserve an explanation, Emily." Richard's father, a stern-looking man, spoke up. "I think we need a paternity test." Immediately. As accusations flew and tempers flared, I quietly slipped out of the house. I had done what I came to do. The truth was out, and for the first time in years, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. Over the next few weeks, the full extent of Emily's deception came to light. Through the family grapevine, I learned that she had been secretly meeting her ex-boyfriend, the one with criminal connections, behind Richard's back. She had been spending Richard's money on him and even pawned her jewelry to pay off his debts. The paternity test results were the final nail in the coffin. The baby wasn't Richard's, it was her ex-boyfriend's. Richard, understandably devastated, filed for divorce. He sued Emily for a substantial sum, citing emotional damages and financial fraud. Her ex-boyfriend, upon learning of the pregnancy, vanished without a trace, leaving Emily to face the consequences alone. My parents, who had always put Emily on a pedestal, were forced to face the harsh reality of her actions. They had to take out a significant loan to help Emily pay the compensation Richard demanded. Their golden child had fallen from grace, and they were left to pick up the pieces. In a twisted turn of events, they tried to blame me for everything. Mom left a voicemail on my phone, her voice bitter and accusing. "Are you happy now, Isabella? You've ruined your sister's life. I hope you're proud of yourself." I deleted the message without responding. Their words no longer had the power to hurt me. As for me, I returned to college, threw myself into my studies, and focused on building the life I wanted. I cut off all communication with my family, changing my phone number and email address. The toxic cycle was finally broken. It's been 2 years since that fateful day when I exposed Emily's lies. I graduated from art college with honors, my final project earning praise from both professors and local art critics. Now, at 23, I'm working at the Harmony Art Gallery in the city. It's a dream come true, surrounded by beautiful artwork every day, helping to curate exhibitions, and even organizing events for up-and-coming artists. But that's not all. I've been painting in my free time, and to my surprise and delight, my work has caught the eye of several collectors. I haven't forgotten my roots, though. I still create tattoo sketches in my spare time. It's become a cherished hobby, a link to the past that reminds me of how far I've come. Some of my designs have even been featured in tattoo magazines, which never fails to make me smile. As for my family, well, that's a complicated story. I've maintained relationships with a few aunts and cousins who stood by me during the fallout. They keep me updated on the family drama, though I try not to let it affect me anymore. From what I hear, Emily is still living with our parents. She's unemployed, struggling to raise her child alone. Mom and Dad, facing financial troubles of their own, are constantly pressuring her to find a job and move out. The arguments are frequent and bitter, I'm told. I haven't spoken to my parents or Emily since that day. They tried reaching out a few times in the beginning, guilt-tripping messages, angry voicemails, but I stood firm in my decision to cut ties. Eventually, they stopped trying. On a brighter note, I've been dating a wonderful guy named Alex for the past year. He's a graphic designer I met at a gallery event. He's kind, supportive, and best of all, he understands my passion for art. We're talking about moving in together soon, another step towards building the life I want. My name is Sarah, and I've been a dentist for over 2 decades now. It's a career I love, but the path to get here wasn't easy. As I sit in my office, staring at the framed diploma on the wall, I can't help but reflect on the tumultuous journey that led me to this point. I grew up in a household where I always felt like the second choice. My parents, Jack and Linda, never tried to hide their preference for my younger sister, Emily. She was born when I was 10, and from that moment on, it was clear who the favorite child was. When it came time for college, I knew I wanted to pursue dentistry. It had been my dream since I was a little girl, fascinated by the way my pediatric dentist could make even the scariest procedures feel like magic. "Mom, Dad, I've been accepted to the dental program at State University," I announced one evening at dinner, barely able to contain my excitement. The silence that followed was deafening. My father cleared his throat. "That's nice, Sarah. But you know we can't afford that. We're saving for Emily's future." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. But I've worked so hard. My grades are perfect, I thought. "You thought wrong," my mother cut in, her voice cold. We've always been clear about our priorities. Emily has a bright future ahead of her. Well, you'll find something suitable, I'm sure. I ran from the table, tears streaming down my face. The next day, I visited my grandparents, Robert and Margaret. They'd always been kinder to me, more understanding. When I told them what happened, my grandfather's face turned red with anger. "Those fools," he muttered. "Don't you worry, Sarah. We'll make sure you get to that school." True to their word, my grandparents scraped together every penny they could to help me with tuition. I worked multiple jobs, studied harder than I ever had before, and eventually graduated at the top of my class. During my final year of dental school, I met Tom. He was charming, handsome, and seemed to genuinely care about me. We married shortly after graduation, despite my parents' objections. "You're making a mistake," my mother hissed at me during the reception. "He's not good enough for this family." I ignored her, convinced that for once in my life, I'd made the right choice. How wrong I was. The first few years were good. We had 2 beautiful children, Max and Lily, and I started building my dental practice. But as time went on, Tom changed. The charming man I'd fallen in love with disappeared, replaced by someone I barely recognized. It started with the drinking. A beer or 2 after work became a 6-pack, then a bottle of whiskey. He'd come home late, reeking of alcohol, picking fights over nothing. I endured it for years, hoping he'd change back into the man I'd married. But one night, as I watched him nearly drop our infant daughter while in a drunken stupor, I knew it was over. The divorce was messy, but in the end, I got custody of the kids and kept my practice. The day I told my parents about the divorce, I foolishly hoped for some support. Instead, I was met with cold disappointment and blame. "I'm sure you're exaggerating," my mother said, her voice dripping with disdain. "Tom always seemed like such a nice man. You probably drove him to drink with your nagging." That was the last straw. I gathered my children and left, vowing never to seek their approval again. Meanwhile, my sister Emily's life seemed picture perfect. She'd become a psychologist, married a successful businessman named David, and had 2 boys of her own. My parents never missed an opportunity to remind me how much better she was doing. "Emily just bought a new house in that fancy neighborhood," my mother would casually mention during our increasingly rare phone calls. "Her practice is really taking off. It's so nice to have a daughter we can be proud of." Years passed, and I built a successful dental practice. I was doing well financially, even able to buy a nice apartment in a good area of town. Ironically, there were times when my parents would call, asking for money. "Sarah, your father and I are a bit short this month. We were hoping you could help out," my mother would say, her tone sugary sweet. Despite everything, I always sent them what they needed. Part of me hoped that by being generous, they might finally see my worth. But their attitude never changed. One day, I received a call from Emily. Our parents had passed away suddenly in a car accident. I was devastated, not just by their loss, but by the realization that we'd never have a chance to reconcile. "I'm in the Maldives with David," Emily said, her voice crackling over the international line. "Could you handle the funeral arrangements? We'll try to get back as soon as we can." So there I was, planning my parents' funeral while my sister lounged on a beach halfway across the world. I threw myself into the task, determined to give them a beautiful send-off, despite our troubled relationship. The day of the funeral arrived, and Emily finally showed up, tanned and seemingly carefree. Right after the funeral, a lawyer approached us. "We need to discuss the will." I hadn't even thought about the will. Surely, despite everything, my parents wouldn't completely forget about me? But as the lawyer read out the details, it became clear that they had done exactly that. Everything, the house, their savings, even family heirlooms, had been left to Emily. There wasn't so much as a mention of my name. As I drove home that day, I made a decision. I was done seeking approval from people who would never give it. I had my children, my career, and my own life. It was time to live it on my terms. After the funeral, my relationship with Emily became even more distant. We rarely spoke, save for obligatory holiday greetings and birthday wishes via Skype. I'd catch glimpses of my nephews, Tommy and Jake, during these calls, but it was hardly enough to form a real relationship with them. From what I could see, the boys were growing up to be quite a handful. During one memorable video call, I watched a 6-year-old Tommy throw a tantrum because Emily wouldn't buy him a new tablet. "But I want it now," he screamed, his face red with anger. Emily just smiled indulgently. "Now, sweetie, we can't always get what we want right away. We'll talk about it later, okay?" I couldn't help but interject. "Emily, don't you think you should be a bit firmer with him? That behavior isn't appropriate for his age." My sister's face hardened. "I'm a psychologist, Sarah. I think I know how to raise my children without causing childhood trauma. They need to feel free to express themselves." As the years went by, my own children grew up and moved out to start their own lives. Max became a successful software engineer, while Lily followed in my footsteps and went to dental school. I was immensely proud of them both. With the kids gone, I found myself enjoying the quiet life of an empty nester. I adopted a cat, Mr. Whiskers, who quickly became my constant companion. My days fell into a comfortable routine of work, home, and the occasional dinner with friends. Then, one rainy Tuesday evening, my peaceful life was shattered by a frantic knocking at my door. I opened it to find Emily standing there, mascara running down her face, with Tommy and Jake in tow. "Sarah," she sobbed, "I need your help. David and I had a huge fight, and I just need a place to stay for a while." I hesitated for a moment, remembering all the years of hurt and neglect. But looking at my sister's tear-stained face and the confused expressions of my nephews, I knew I couldn't turn them away. "Come in," I said, stepping aside to let them enter. As they filed into my apartment, I got my first real look at Tommy and Jake in years. Tommy, now 9, had a sullen look on his face, while 6-year-old Jake was bouncing off the walls, touching everything in sight. "Jake, honey, please don't touch that," I said gently as he reached for an antique vase. He ignored me completely, knocking the vase to the floor where it shattered into 1,000 pieces. Emily barely reacted. "Oh, boys will be boys," she said with a weak laugh. "We'll replace it, won't we, Jake?" Jake just shrugged and moved on to the next breakable object. I took a deep breath, reminding myself that they were guests in my home and that this was just temporary. But as days turned into weeks, it became clear that Emily had no intention of leaving anytime soon. My once tidy apartment descended into chaos. Toys and clothes were strewn everywhere, the walls were covered in crayon drawings, and the constant noise was driving me to my wits' end. One particularly trying afternoon, I returned home from a long day at the dental office to find my living room in complete disarray. The floor was littered with toys, crushed snacks, and what appeared to be the stuffing from one of my throw pillows. In the center of it all sat Tommy and Jake, gleefully engaged in what looked like a food fight with my good china as ammunition. "Boys," I exclaimed, shock and frustration evident in my voice. "What on earth are you doing?" They barely glanced in my direction, continuing their rambunctious play without missing a beat. I looked around frantically for Emily, finally spotting her lounging on the balcony, engrossed in her phone. "Emily," I called out, trying to keep my voice steady, "have you seen what the boys are doing?" She glanced up briefly, a look of mild annoyance crossing her face. "They're just playing, Sarah. Don't be such a killjoy." I took a deep breath, counting to 10 in my head before speaking again. "Emily, they're destroying my home. This has to stop." Emily rolled her eyes and reluctantly got up from her chair. She sauntered into the living room, surveying the chaos with a disinterested eye. "All right, boys, that's enough for now. Why don't you go watch some TV?" The boys cheered and raced off to the guest room, leaving the mess behind. I stared at my sister in disbelief. "That's it? You're not going to make them clean up?" "Oh, relax," Emily said dismissively. "I'll take care of it later. You're always so uptight, Sarah. It's not good for your blood pressure. As the days wore on, I found myself becoming more and more stressed. The constant noise, the mess, the lack of respect for my home and my rules, it was all taking a toll on me. Even Mr. Whiskers, my usually affectionate cat, had taken to hiding under my bed most of the time, only emerging for food and to use his litter box. One evening, as I was preparing dinner, a task that had somehow fallen solely to me despite Emily and the boys being my guests, there was a knock at the door. I opened it to find Mrs. Johnson, my elderly neighbor from the floor below, standing there with a stern expression on her face. "Dr. Sarah," she began, her voice tight with barely contained anger. "I've always considered you a model neighbor, but these past few weeks have been unbearable. The noise from your apartment is constant. I can hear screaming and things breaking at all hours of the day and night. What on earth is going on up here?" I felt my face flush with embarrassment. "I'm so sorry, Mrs. Johnson. My sister and her children are staying with me temporarily, and I'm afraid the boys can be a bit energetic." Mrs. Johnson's expression softened slightly. "I understand children can be lively, dear, but this goes beyond that. And it's not just the noise. Have you seen what they've done to the hallway?" She gestured for me to follow her. We walked to the stairwell, and I gasped in horror. The walls were covered in graffiti, crude drawings, and misspelled words spray-painted in garish colors. I recognized Tommy's handiwork immediately. This is unacceptable," I stammered, mortified. "I had no idea." "I'll clean it up right away, Mrs. Johnson. And I promise, it won't happen again." "See that it doesn't," she replied firmly. "Otherwise, I'm afraid I'll have to report this to the building management and the appropriate authorities." Once she was out of sight, I leaned against the wall, overwhelmed by the mess my life had become. Taking a deep breath, I steeled myself and marched back to my apartment. As I opened the door, I was met with the sound of Tommy and Jake's laughter, punctuated by the crash of something else breaking. "Boys," I said firmly, "turn that off. We have work to do." They ignored me, as usual. I strode over and switched off the TV. "Hey," Tommy protested. "We were playing that." "Not anymore," I replied. "You're going to clean up the mess you made in the hallway. Come with me, now." Grumbling and whining, they followed me to the stairwell. I handed them scrub brushes and a bucket of soapy water. "Start cleaning," I instructed. They stared at me in disbelief. But Mom said we don't have to do chores," Tommy stammered. "Your mom isn't here right now," I said. "And in my house, we clean up our messes." They half-heartedly swiped at the walls, more interested in splashing each other than actually cleaning. I was about to intervene when I heard footsteps on the stairs. To my surprise, it was Mrs. Johnson's son, Mark, in his police uniform. He must have just gotten off duty. "Everything okay here, Dr. Sarah?" he asked, eyeing the boy suspiciously. Sensing an opportunity, I explained the situation. Mark's face hardened as he turned to Tommy and Jake. "Listen up, boys," he said sternly. "Vandalism is a serious offense. If you don't clean this up properly, we're going to have some real problems. Understand?" The boys' eyes widened in fear. They nodded vigorously and began scrubbing the walls with newfound enthusiasm. I was supervising their progress when I heard the elevator ding. Emily stepped out, fresh from a trip to the beauty salon, her hair and nails immaculate. Her jaw dropped when she saw the scene before her. "What the hell is going on here?" she shrieked. I calmly explained the situation, but Emily wasn't having it. "How dare you force my children to do manual labor?" she yelled. "This is cruel and unusual punishment." "Cruel?" I shot back, my patience finally snapping. "Cruel is letting them destroy other people's property without consequences." Emily grabbed the boy's hands. "Come on, we're leaving. I won't let you be subjected to this abuse." The next few days were tense. Emily and the boys stayed, but they barely spoke to me. I was starting to think things couldn't get any worse. I was wrong. I came home from work one afternoon to find my apartment eerily quiet. "Hello?" I called out. A pitiful meow answered me. I followed the sound to find Mr. Whiskers huddled in a corner, his fur a startling shade of blue. "Oh my God," I gasped. The poor cat was covered in paint, frantically trying to lick it off. I screamed in horror and anger. Scooping up Mr. Whiskers, I wrapped him in a towel and rushed him to the vet, my heart pounding. The vet's diagnosis was grim. "He's ingested a significant amount of paint," she told me. "We'll need to keep him overnight for treatment." Leaving Mr. Whiskers at the clinic was one of the hardest things I've ever done. I returned home, shaking with fury. Emily was lounging on the couch, scrolling through her phone. I explained to her what happened to Mr. Whiskers, demanding she discipline the boys and help clean up the mess they'd made. Emily shrugged. "It's just a cat, Sarah. Don't be so dramatic." I couldn't believe my ears. "Just a cat? He could die, Emily." "Well, that's not my problem," she said dismissively. "And neither is the cleaning. It's your apartment, after all." The next morning, I arrived at my dental practice earlier than usual. My mind was reeling from the events of the past few weeks, and I knew I needed to get to the bottom of this situation. With a deep breath, I picked up my phone and dialed David's number. "David, I'm sorry to bother you," I began, "but I need to understand what's going on. Why did you and Emily have a fight? When is she planning to come back home?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then, David let out a heavy sigh. "Sarah, I'm afraid Emily won't be coming back. We're getting divorced." David's story came pouring out, each revelation more shocking than the last. He told me how Emily had quit her psychology practice years ago, refusing to work or even help around the house. Their home had fallen into disrepair, and the children were completely out of control. "And then there were the vacations," he went on. "She'd jet off without me or the kids, using the money from your parents' inheritance. I thought she was just taking some time for herself, but..." His voice trailed off, and I felt a chill run down my spine. "But what, David?" "She was cheating on me, Sarah. Multiple times, with different men. God, I can't believe I'm saying this, but I had to get a DNA test for the boys. Thankfully, they're mine, but after all that, I just couldn't do it anymore. I filed for divorce and asked her to leave." After finishing the call with David, I sat at my desk, trying to process everything I'd learned. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. Emily wasn't planning on leaving anytime soon. She was using me as a fallback, a free place to stay while her life fell apart. That evening, I confronted Emily. The boys were in the guest room, engrossed in their video games as usual, while Emily lounged on my couch, scrolling through her phone. "Emily, we need to talk," I said firmly, sitting across from her. "I spoke to David today." "Is it true? Are you really getting divorced?" Emily shrugged, an air of indifference about her. "Yeah, it's true. David and I are over. I'm tired of him and his expectations. But don't worry, sis. You'll help me out, right? After all, that's what sisters are for." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Help you out? Emily, you've turned my life upside down. You're not even trying to get back on your feet. What about your inheritance? Surely you can use that to find your own place." She laughed dismissively. "Oh, that money? It's gone, Sarah. There were barely crumbs left anyway." I felt my blood begin to boil. "Crumbs? Emily, our parents left you over $200,000. How could you possibly have blown through all that money?" Emily just shrugged again, reaching for her phone. "Life's expensive, Sarah. You wouldn't understand." In that moment, something inside me snapped. Years of resentment, weeks of frustration, all came bubbling to the surface. "No, you're the one who doesn't understand," I said, my voice low and controlled. "I've had enough. Get a job, start disciplining the boys, contribute to this household, or get out. You have 1 week, Emily." 1 week to show me you're serious about turning things around. Emily's eyes widened in shock. For the first time since she'd arrived, she seemed to realize I wasn't going to back down. A few days after my ultimatum to Emily, I returned home from a long day at the dental office. As I approached my apartment door, I was struck by an unusual silence. No shouting, no crashes, no sounds of destruction. It was peaceful. Warily, I entered the apartment. "Emily?" I called out. No response. I found Tommy and Jake sitting quietly on the couch, their eyes red and puffy as if they'd been crying. My heart sank. "Boys, where's your mother?" I asked gently. Tommy wordlessly handed me a piece of paper. With trembling hands, I unfolded it and began to read. "Dear Sarah, I've realized that motherhood just isn't for me. I'm still young and I want to live my life. I've met someone, he's young, exciting, and doesn't have any baggage. We're leaving town together. You're always going on about responsibility and all that boring stuff, so here's your chance to put your money where your mouth is. The boys are your problem now. You're an old maid anyway, so you might as well be useful and raise them. Don't try to contact me. By the time you read this, I'll be long gone. Emily." I collapsed onto the sofa, my mind reeling. How could she do this? How could she abandon her own children? With shaking hands, I picked up my phone and dialed David's number. When he answered, I could barely get the words out. "David, it's Sarah. You need to come over right away. It's about the boys." Within an hour, David was at my door. I handed him Emily's note without a word. As he read it, his face cycled through shock, anger, and finally, a deep sadness. "Oh, boys," he sighed, kneeling down to hug Tommy and Jake. "I'm so sorry." Over the next few hours, David and I talked, trying to figure out what to do. It was clear that the boys needed stability, and David was determined to provide that. "I'll take them home," he said firmly. "And first thing tomorrow, I'm going to file for full custody." I nodded, relief washing over me. "I think that's for the best." "And David, I'll help in any way I can. I'll testify, provide character witnesses, whatever you need." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of legal proceedings. David filed for full custody, and I found myself recounting Emily's behavior to stern-faced judges and social workers. In the end, the decision was swift. Emily, who never even showed up for the hearings, was stripped of her parental rights. David was granted full custody of Tommy and Jake. As the dust settled, I found myself adjusting to a new normal. I visited David and the boys often, marveling at the changes in their household. David had hired a part-time nanny to help out, but he was also making a concerted effort to be more present in his sons' lives. One sunny Saturday, about a month after everything had happened, I visited their home. I was amazed to find Tommy setting the table for lunch, while Jake was helping David prepare sandwiches in the kitchen. "Aunt Sarah," they both cried, running to hug me. I embraced them tightly, noticing how much calmer and happier they seemed. "They're doing so well," I remarked to David as we watched the boys play in the backyard after lunch. "You're doing a great job." 5 years have passed, and life has taken unexpected turns. I'm still practicing dentistry, finding fulfillment in my work and enjoying quiet evenings with Mr. Whiskers, my faithful feline companion. Tommy, now 14, has become something of a local celebrity. His graffiti art, once a source of frustration, has evolved into a genuine talent. He's a popular blogger, showcasing his work online and even getting featured in the news. His success has brought him a decent income, unusual for someone his age. One Sunday afternoon, David and the boys were visiting me for our weekly family dinner. We were catching up on Tommy's latest art project when there was an unexpected knock at the door. To everyone's shock, it was Emily. She barged in, eyes fixed on Tommy. "I hear you're making quite a bit of money now," she said, her voice sickly sweet. "Mommy needs her share." David stepped forward, his face stern. "You have no right to any of it, Emily." He pulled out a document from his wallet. "You were stripped of your parental rights years ago. Leave now, or I'm calling the police." Emily's face contorted with anger, but seeing our united front, she turned and left without another word. We haven't seen her since. As for me, I continue to work and enjoy life's simple pleasures. I stay in touch with my own children, now adults themselves, cherishing our relationship. This unexpected journey has taught me the true meaning of family. It's not always about blood, but about love, support, and being there for each other through thick and thin.